And I want. Yes, but that's on criminal. So this morning's ethics this morning, we've got an hour and a half. So I'd like it, it depends what you want to do, but last time the people doing the criminal stuff wanted to go straight through and not have a break and just get it all wrapped up. So I'm open to that if that's what you want to do, but you tell me how you feel and we've gone through this session and we'll take it from there. I think for this session, really, it's up to you what you want to use it for to get the most out of it, because it's a revision session. My thinking is that it might be helpful to start off with you raising any questions you've come across in the course of your studies that you'd like me to talk about, if there are any of those. And then I've just cobbled together some questions from previous papers on the sort of AML aspects of the ethics paper, which I thought we could go through. And because I'm feeling nasty this morning, I've got this, and I'm just going to pick people out of this list and say, question 5, what would you think about that? So everyone has to read them all, and I'm not looking for volunteers, I'm looking for victims. So I thought that's probably the easiest way to do it. So to kick off, has anyone got any questions about what happened, what we discussed last time, that you come across in the course of your studies that you'd like to have clarification on?
Yeah. So I'm happy to give it a go as well. Hopefully already know from coming to the lectures and from practice, but I know you in depth.
Okay, so I'm picking up the vibe, you're not keen on the victim idea. Yeah, that's fine. I mean, manage your expectations. Yeah, and I'm not looking to test or judge you. I thought it'd be a helpful way to let you feel more military. I'm not. Yeah, don't worry. I'm not taking notes. Who didn't know what you? I'm not. No, don't worry about that. Okay, so has anyone got any questions other than that? And then they've come. If they've started revising, anything that's come to light they'd like more information on. No.
One question actually. I think we've probably covered this last time. Of course, there's a new handbook now. Are we going to send a new handbook?
No, I asked about that several times, and I was assured that you will only be expected to know what the state of play was at July last year. So that'll be the handbook as it was then, and that's what I've been told.
Yeah. And we've questioned it, like emailed them and said, can you clarify? And they come back on. Okay,
well, I find that a bit worrying, because I especially said, when I took on this role, I said to them, look, you do realise the whole thing is changing, the new handbook has been coming out. And they said, no, it'll be as it is at July last year. That's what I was told. Yeah, that's right. It will be, yes. The handbook isn't really relevant to criminal paper, not really, not. It's more the ethics side of it. And when I was told that, sorry, looking doubtful about that.
No, I was in the handbook, so I wasn't going to pick it up. But yeah.
But I mean, I don't. Well, I have been told, I've been assured that when I prepared my material, that it should only be what was in place in July last year. That's what I was told. Because if you look online, it says on the syllabus you're expecting to say as it July last year. That's changed, has it? Well, no one's told me that. Well, that. Well. Yeah, well, I have to say I'm really sorry to hear that this has happened, because I expressly tried to get clarification before I started. I know you're not blaming me, but I'm just concerned for you guys, because
maybe ethics is July.
Yeah.
Yeah. The guys that are marking it.
Yeah.
So maybe just be
different.
No, I've tried to find out. I've made inquiries of the people setting the ethics paper and the criminal paper to find out what approach they're likely to take, purely to know whether it's worth looking at past papers or whether it's going to be something totally different. I haven't been able to get any clarity on the ethics side. On the criminal paper, I've been told, because the person setting it is in our office, basically, she said to me it'll be a similar approach to previous years. My guess would be, because it's the same person setting the ethics papers, has done it in the past, it will still be the same approach. I mean, to be honest, as we'll see when we go to some of the questions, they're quite sort of high level, really. I don't think they'll be drilling down the difference of details between the two handbooks. Probably, I don't know. I can't say with certainty. And I have asked, but I've not heard back, to have some input, or at least some sight of the questions before they're finalised, and to be involved in the marking. But I've not been told about that, so I don't know what's in the person's mind assessment, or how close they are to any of this stuff, or how close they are to the changes. I simply don't know.
How close is
No, not really. Not. It's still the same. I mean, if you look, the questions will be things, as you'll see from the quotes. It's all things like, but it's also basically what you'll need to know. If the ethics paper is similar to previous years, it'll be basically about CDD, and we talk about some sort of foreign PEP, and what do you do about that? And you just need to know the different kinds of CDD, and that should get you through. I mean, there are differences in the handbook. You say it's a lot longer, but my own feeling is the person setting the question will not be sufficiently close to the changes that they won't want to get into that. That is my guess. That's why it's pretty high level stuff. But it's not going to be that. No. Yeah, exactly. I think that's what we'll still be going for. So that's the thing. But I mean, it is a concern to me though that the parameters have shifted, because
we don't know.
I think that's how we had some experience last week. There's been a recent case where it's not, so we really need to know.
I'm surprised they didn't let people like me know that's what they were doing, because people actually involved in the teaching should have been told that. I don't understand it.
And it's the same for family as well. This is what these guys are about. Doesn't refer to a specific course of paper that says we are supposed to know the law as a I think that's probably going to be
the only thing is on the updated syllabus they put on didn't have those dates in it. Yeah.
That's what I mean.
So on even though we've got another from the gate, we've got a new syllabus and we've got
The new syllabus is there. Okay.
It's just updated.
Okay.
But it's got those dates in, so as at 31st, and then for the date they've got all the states every meeting.
Right, okay.
But no other lecturers seem to know that.
No, well, I certainly didn't know that. Anyway, it doesn't hugely matter for my area, because I would say that as I say, although there's a new handbook and there's obviously a lot of changes on foot to the process of the crime regulations, in essence, it'll be the same kind. It'll cover the same sort of material. So, and as you say, a question with a few marks, they're not going to be delving into detail. So, as long as you're familiar with the basic principles, the high-level principles, I would say it'll be similar. And so, the same person setting it has done it in every other year. So, I don't know the change. I do hope to get sight of the questions over, because the other thing that's happened is my husband used to be second marker in the ethics paper. So he used to say to me, look at the AML ones. I mean, informally at home, he said, what do you think about that? And I would give him some input into it. But he's not doing that this year, so I don't know who's doing that. So I don't know if I'll be contacted by anybody to have a look at the questions, the answers, to have my take on them. So I don't know how close anyone involved in setting or marking will be to the AML framework. So
my understanding is the second marker and assistant from Jersey, not the adult. Or you sort of struggle to roll.
I'm searching myself into that.
Yeah, so for example, in the civil paper, it would be better than the paper, but never used in that civil work. Whereas we have Blaine and Mark and Carey who are adults. I don't know whether they were then involved at a higher level. I don't know.
Okay, well, I'll look into it further, because I mean, my position's slightly different, because I've actually set and written material and taught the topic, so I'm slightly concerned that someone who's not been involved at all is marking it. Anyway, that's not your issue. I don't worry, but I'll try and do what I can with you on that. But, Okay, so leaving aside the issues of the process you're about to go through, any questions on the substance of the material? No? Okay, should we hand these questions around then? Just myself. I've gone back to the last 4 years and I've just taken out a few questions. The first set. Well, you may have seen this if you started looking at past paper already. You may have already seen some of these questions, but can you pass these around as well? And this is. Sorry, one more set, yeah. Okay, let's start with an easy one. Easy in the sense that it's obvious what it's about, what they're looking for. We'll start with the one that's headed question 4, Bernard, a British citizen. So do you want to read through that briefly and then I'll pick on someone to start talking about it. Okay, have I had a chance to read it? Let's start. I'll pick on it at random. I'll go for Gemma Sauvage. So Gemma, what would you, I mean, in a way it's easier because you see what the question's about. It's not enough to work out what it's aimed at. So what due diligence will you seek?
Successful basic passport proof of address. Then I'll just put a copy of the trust structure.
I think really probably you should start by saying, looking at what categories of due diligence you'll be looking for here. Is this going to be standard due diligence or enhanced due diligence? Probably that would be your starting point, because that will affect what you have to do. So how would you'd have to look, is the person a PEP, for example? Or is there a high risk element that makes it seem like any of the factors that make you look for very enhanced due diligence? Probably not here, doesn't look like there, but at least just say you know that fact, I would suggest. Okay, and then you get into the measures. So yes, as you were saying, you're quite right, you'd look for identification documents, verification. Yeah, I mean, he's looking to merge. He's looking to merge 2 companies, isn't he? So Yeah, you might as well say that.
I
Yes.
guess you get a point.
Yes, I mean also I do know, looking at the mark scheme, there's 7 marks. I know from previous years they do tend to mark it in quite a sort of what's the word? I don't want to say simplistic way is unfair, but quite sort of you get 7 ticks, you'll get 7 marks. You put something down there that is right, they'll give you a tick for it. So if you say this is transactional work and therefore it comes in, they'll probably give you a tick for that, even though it's obvious and it's inherent in the question.
Yeah.
But yes, but it's just worth doing that. So yes, then sorry, Gemma, you were saying I interrupted you, but the due diligence, you'd go for the identification documents. I mean, it is worth saying, I would, you could say something like, I would check in the GFSE handbook for the kind of things I should be looking at. Just put that down, show you know that stuff's in there, you've got to get a point for that. But like, bear in mind there are 7 marks there, so they're looking for a reasonable number of things. So if you just say, I'd check his passport details, you won't get enough marks for that. So you need to put some padding around it and say, you know, the kind of due diligence. If it's a PEP, it's enhanced, which would require you to get senior management approval, check source of funds. You need to know the business structure. If it's standard, it's the 3 things, isn't it? It's identification, the purpose of the transaction, and understanding the structure involved. If you have to go to enhanced, you need to get senior management approval, and you need to check the source of funds. So just put down those things that's what you would do. And then the next question, are there any AML issues? I'm not quite sure what that's aimed at.
So are they getting a sort of layering here because there's Germany,
Well, I don't think so, because I think the suspicion bit comes to the next question. So I think that might be, I think the issue might be to say that because he's going to be director of a trust business which is currently Seychelles and wants to merge with Guernsey, he would need a fiduciary license to operate the business from Guernsey. I think it might be that. It's only 2 marks, and my guess is they want you to say there, you need to advise him that if he wants to run a trust business from Guernsey, he's got to have a fiduciary license from GFSE. It might be that. Well, it sort of is, because I mean it's AML. It is the license is required. Well, no, it's not. You're right. It's prudential regulation, not AML. But that's what I think it's getting at. And I don't really know, but that's what I could think it could mean.
Or with the conscious being done. Not on the face of the question. I mean, maybe you could go on and say that.
My advice, yeah, very good view. Yes, yeah. My advice would be: do not, under any circumstances, give an answer which, even how close it is to the question, it's not what they're looking for, because they'll fail you unfairly, but they will. So if you say no, there aren't any, then you'll get marked down. So yeah. So I mean, that's all I can think that was aimed at. I don't know, because the next question is: are there any suspicions in relation to the transaction? So that seemed to be the point about layering, whatever. Seemed to be that.
So no, if there were any suspicions in relation to, isn't it just reporting to you?
Yeah.
Yes. Well, it could be. I took that to mean. Yes, I suppose you're right. Actually, you could say other. Yes, it could be. Is it looking at layering? I don't know. That's one of the difficulties of the bar exam. The questions are all a bit. You don't quite know what's in the mind of the examiner. It's quite hard to tell. I mean, I read that and thought it meant registration, but you may be wrong. Regulation, registered with the commission as a getting a fiduciary license. Yeah, that's what I thought. That's what I thought too was. But yeah, you're probably right. Actually, it might be. Is there layering? Is there? Yeah, it could be that. But I mean, yeah. And then the third one, yes, as you said, are there any suspicions? So let's have Edwin. What would you do about that? And what would your answer be to that question?
If you did have any suspicions, I think you check your information, so you could go back and ask if you need further information. But you've got to conscious that to ignore, so you're probably going to feature senior management in your manual doing reporting stuff if you had any suspicions. And then they would report it to the FIS on the reporting system.
That's right. And if, well, how would you, yes, how, another issue that you could mention as well is if you decide to decline the business, because you're concerned, you should still make a report to the FIS.
Yeah.
No, I think we'll have to be, isn't it? Necessarily, we don't know what the requirements and sections are.
You're suspicious.
Oh, sorry.
But Well, I think that the point you raised is a valid one. That would probably come in the first question. What due diligence would you seek? So you would need to understand the purpose of the transaction, the purpose of the structure. Why is it doing this? Why is this happening? Be satisfied that there is a valid business reason for it. Because if there isn't, it would raise questions of, is this attempting to layer in somewhere? What's this about? So that is a valid question. How come, you would need to understand why it was that someone living in Germany was directing a trust business based in the Seychelles and wanted to merge it with Guernsey. What was the purpose of that? There may well be a legitimate reason for that, but you need to satisfy yourself with that. And that's something you should, I think, bring out in the first question.
And also, that question, in respect to due diligence, would you also be able to do due diligence about the trust business that he has in the Seychelles, so the other directors having their beneficial owners?
Yeah, if there are other co-directors, yes, you would. Yeah. I mean, that all comes under the heading really of understanding the business structure as well. So I think as much as you can put in there about the things you'd want to know. I mean, stepping back from it really, of the actual wording of the regulation, the PB regs, you say, well, what do I actually want to know? To understand this, what would I need to know about the business? Not can I tell you what's the question you should be asking. Okay, any other points on that question? Yeah. Okay, like I say, you get a pretty good clue from the mark scheme how much they're looking for. Okay, we turn over the page. Question 5. Who shall I ask there? I will ask Jasmine. They won't detain you long. What's that?
Yeah. One more, I wouldn't get in the exam. I have no idea what I need to be registered as.
Sorry? I mean, it's a slightly strange question because
I don't think
I mean, the question I find the question quite hard to follow because if you are a relevant business, you're a legal firm which is a relevant business, you are required to be registered under the crime regulations. I don't quite know what they're getting at. Are they saying should be registered as a lawyer or an accountant? I think it's very, lawyer and estate agent. I don't know. But it would have to be registered as a prescribed business. Yeah, put down that. Yeah. Like I said, these questions are slightly weird. I mean, it's quite hard to tell what they're getting at. And I'd say if you're not sure, you think about one or two things, put them both down. Okay.
we're not. We're just
If you're not sure, you've got to see one of two things. I put them both down, even if it's only one mark, because just. Sorry. No, I mean that would be a financial services business. Yeah. No, it is clearly transactional work within the meaning of within the definition is scheduled to the process of the crime law. So you could probably say that actually. Well, if you said that, they'd think, oh, this person knows something about this, and that's how it works. So.
You probably want to check with other advocates.
Oh yeah. Sorry, yes, I'm not going into those. Those are the non-AML ones. It just happened on the same page. That's all. Okay, so that's that page. Let's look now at the short one headed question 2. The one that looks like that. Question 2, 10 marks. That short one. At a social event, you are approached by Mark. Okay, who shall I pick? Ben, do you want to kick off with this one?
Figure out if it's standard or enhanced due diligence, because it's Saudi, probably enhanced. We need to know more about Mr. Smith in that regard.
Well, I think the first thing you want to know probably is what nature of advice is being sought, because it's for a client. If it's advice about litigation, for example, it won't be transactional work. But assume that it's established that it is transactional work, and therefore you're obliged to comply with the AML framework. Then what would you do?
I think you would need to find out more about Mr. Smith. In terms of whether you need to apply, what level of due diligence you need to apply.
Yep, and then
The nature of transaction and all that stuff.
yeah. So basically, what you need to do here is they start off by saying, is it transactional work or not? Assume that it is. If you say if it's not, therefore won't do anything, you'll fail. You say assume that it is, but show you know that that's the criteria you apply. And then I would just go through and say I'd look at the standard, explain what it is. I'd look at the risk. I'd look at the identity, blah 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 blah. Nature of the purpose of the transaction. If I then discover that Mr. Smith was a PEP or there are other concerns, I don't apply enhanced. Just go through all that, just to get your 10 marks. Just go through the checklist. Remember the checklist I put at the end of the study guide, the various things to go through. Just apply that, and that'll give you your marks. The fact that it's in Saudi Arabia, what do you think could be the significance of that? Sanctions, yeah, he could have links to Middle Eastern business that could be sanctioned. And if you have any concerns,
The sanctions thing with Saudi Arabia is not.
No, it's not. It's not. But
I mean, do we need to? To me, Saudi Arabia is worth chatting about, and that's general tax grabbing sanctions.
no, it isn't. But you need to show you're aware of that. So you say something like, given that he is from the Middle East, lots of neighbouring countries are subject to sanctions regimes.
Yeah,
I would just establish whether there's any possible sanctions connection here.
Right.
That sort of thing. Just say that.
That's only flying in from
Iran.
He could well. He could well.
Probably a big name.
Yeah.
You just misspelled shape.
And then we've got at the end the same question as the last one. If you have any concerns, who should you report to, and which body would your firm ultimately report to? Heidi, what would you say about that?
So I think this is that wasn't and then if there were another area of sufficient concern, then what then the side.
And what about taking on the business? It's worth mentioning you would, if you had concerns, you would decline the business. So that just bring it up. Yeah. So I would say it's worth putting that in there, saying that if I had concerns, I decline, but I would still be obliged to make the report. So just bring that up. I mean, you'll see there's a common. All these questions are basically asking the same thing in different ways. That's what you need to be covering. Okay, let's go on to the paper, the 2016. The FIS, yeah. I don't think so, no. Oh, actually, one other point that I should mention, actually, which we haven't touched on, Saudi Arabia, it's not just sanctions, there's also the issue of terrorist financing as well, because of where it is. So it's worth bringing that out as well. that is going from side where it's not necessarily money laundering. It could be that, but it could also be a terrorist financing possibility because he's in a country that's, you know, a transit country for terrorist areas. So bring that out as well. I mean, terrorist financing is kind of sort of poor relation with the AML framework. It never really arises here very often, but it's worth. It is on the syllabus. It's worth showing you know we're aware of it. Okay, so we do 2016 that paper. Question 1, yeah. Have a look at that. Don't bother about the final paragraph, the 1.4 question. That's not an AML issue, so bother with that. Okay. Paula, do you want to kick us off for this one?
So for transactional work, you need to be
Yep.
then what do you have to have registered? Do you have to see in order to carry on conveyancing work? Is that going back to the
I think it is. It's a strange question. I don't know quite what that's about, but I think that's what they're asking. So you'd say it's transactional work, and therefore it comes in the definition of prescribed transactional work in Schedule 3 of the crime law, therefore prescribed business in the PV regs.
What documentation will you seek in relation to current due diligence and other checks, and you consider whether this is low standard or high risk?
Yep.
Consider a little bit more about David, whether or not he is a pet. If not, then we would need standard documentation, so proof of ID and address from him. And other client checks. I don't know whether you'd look at to see if there's any enterprise media coverage.
Yeah, I guess that's what it means. I mean, yeah.
I don't know.
Whether he's on a sanctions list, highly unlikely, but
what information should you provide him and when?
yeah, I'm not interested in those sort of things. Sorry, but don't worry about that today.
Right.
That's, yeah, but that you're right. That sort of stuff. That's the other part of the
Regarding his right to use
yeah. Don't worry about that. I'm not doing those. I'm just doing the AML stuff. So But yeah, that's right. And you look at the marks, it's 11 marks. And I suppose, roughly speaking, 2/3 of this is the AML stuff and 1/3 of it at the end, roughly. So you're probably looking for maybe 8 points you've got to pick up here. And you've probably, what you said, it would have covered all those, I would say. So when you look at your answer, if you think you've given enough materials to get those 8 ticks, you'll be all right.
I don't know if this is too obvious, but obviously in the question we're told that we know what the source of funds is. We just highlight, we know what essentially through buying house with.
Yeah, when you get to the checks, if he's a PEP, you need to know source of funds, but then he's telling you that it's having worked as an accountant, so it's there, but you want to check that obviously, but it's there. But yeah, it's worth, I agree, it's worth saying that. I mean, you could even say, you know, on the face of it, this looks legitimate, it doesn't look as any concerns here because he's working as accountant for Paris. It's not someone coming to you who's working as Vladimir Putin's cleaner and suddenly got millions of pounds to buy a house. So it sounds on the face of it plausible. So, but all those things are worth saying, yeah, absolutely.
Somebody disappointed. I'm saying, you're absolutely right. Question is not.
Yeah, it is, yeah. Well, you get the sense of some of these, I think.
It's not intellectually stimulating.
That's true.
Okay, so that's that one. And then if you go to the next page, question 2, have a look at that. Sorry, not question 2, beg your pardon, forget that one, that's not, no, it's the one on the back of the next page. Sorry, Simon, you're right, Simon now. Question 3, yeah.
Are we skipping 2?
Yeah, 2 is something to do with AML. And in fact, question 3 is very little to do with AML, but I just put it on there to have a look through and then see what AML stuff comes out for you from that. It's not very much, I would say, but a bit. Actually, I know I'm wrong. There's quite a lot. I should look at it more carefully. There's quite a lot of stuff in there. And there's a 28-mark question, so you'll need to work quite hard to get stuff out to justify those marks. Okay, Laurent, do you want to kick off this one?
Yeah. So we're picking up at 3.4.
3.1. No, the very first question.
Oh, right, yeah, sorry.
Let's try.
You need a physical license.
Yeah.
3.2. Sorry, I actually skipped all these. I thought they were professional PC questions.
Well, they are sort of, but they're
So I
sort
can
of.
see this later. What issues arise? Well, this is, I mean, that throws up suspicion. So you would probably need to seek more information in order to understand the discrepancy. And then you would kind of send off the, you would speak to your MLRO. That the next step in the kind of chain and go through that process.
Tax evasion.
Yeah, it is tax evasion. Yeah, it looks to me like it's tax evasion. But it might not be that, because if people are being paid in cash, that's a classic example of laundering money. So if you're getting cash payments, like money laundering, so it could be tax evasion, but it could be money laundering. So you'd have to look into that, and then, yeah, those are the things that could be happening there. Or terrorist financing. I mean, it's unlikely, but you can mention that. It's a possibility that people, it's being used for illicit purposes, whether that may be money laundering, most likely money laundering or tax evasion, but it might be a TF link, and it's highly improbable. But yeah, and if you mention, I think it's worth saying it's highly improbable, but it's something you need to be aware of as well, just so you know. Okay, question 3. That's I think that's covered at the end, because yeah, well, it says what issues arise. So I think what they're asking for is what kind of things might that be. So we say it would be probably money laundering or tax evasion.
Well, you don't have any other.
I think
No. Well, I was just thinking it through, we get later on to see that the current owners you actually entered for previously, that they were a client. I'm just thinking about if they were evading tax by just trousering the money, cash, not paying tax, would you be under a duty because you had a previous relationship with them as client to do something like that?
I think it's irrespective of whether it's a client, isn't it? You're in the positive obligation.
Well, even though it's not a client,
I think that
The reporting obligation applies to any information that comes to you in the course of a business, in other words, of course, your working life. It doesn't matter whether it's a client of yours, same thing, so there would be an obligation.
Would you say that you would you hire an accountant just to be your lawyer, not an accountant, and business to do with money?
I don't think you could be expected to hire your own accountant to investigate what they've done. That would be, but I think you'd be probably expected to make a report. You'd report that to authorities, I would say. That's what
I guess the fact that Simon has instructed you to look at the account, and then you flag up quite an issue like this, you don't indicate that he's not concerned. I wonder whether you would having that account be suspicious. You should be concerned.
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, I would say so. And I think you have got a duty to report that, even though, because remember, if he's trying to do the same thing, he's essentially telling you he's going to embark on a criminal enterprise of some sort, whether it's tax evasion or whatever, but he's going to do something criminal. And you'll remember that in the legal framework imposing the reporting obligation, while there's no obligation to report privileged information, there is if it's for the purposes of a criminal enterprise. So actually, you'd be being sucked in here to a criminal enterprise if you did it, and therefore you should report this.
So would you just report it against the current owner? Because he hasn't reported it, he's not actually taking a account. Or would you, in your report, would you actually say that Simon is also intending to do the same thing? Do you see what I mean?
Good. I do see what you mean. Yes, good question. I mean, yeah.
Obviously, the main thing is the current owner, and everyone has the issue. if he's saying actually I'm going to do that.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely have to report the current
I mean,
owners.
I'm failing to
I
see,
think-
Done it.
just thinking about it before, how he's not- perhaps worth mentioning the point about him actually being about to engage on criminal press, but definitely not clear that that's actually what he's doing, right?
No, indeed, no, that's right. No, but I mean, I'm saying is if you look at, because people often get concerned about the issue where privilege stops when it comes to reporting suspicion, and the law is very clear that privilege against privileged information is not protected if it's for a criminal purpose. If someone tells you something for a criminal purpose, then you're not protected. So you could argue here that the fact he's told you this is not protected by privilege because it would be a criminal enterprise, or criminal activity being involved by tax evasion, whatever that's going on there. And basically, the thing to bear in mind with all these questions is they're not really looking for the right answer. They're looking to see that you understand how the framework works. So, you know, it'll be a judgment call whether you would make a report about him, because he's actually doing anything wrong at the moment. But as long as you're aware that you have an obligation to make a report and give consideration to that, if I were marking the paper, that'll be enough for me to give you the point. So you clearly know you make a judgment on whether to give consideration to making a report or not, and what you would then do. I mean, the fact that someone says he's considering being involved in tax evasion, whatever it is, it's a sort of grey area. Would you report? I don't know what I would do in reality. In real life, I don't really know whether I'd report that or not. I say to him, by no means do that. That's illegal. But whether I'd actually then report it, I mean, yeah.
Likely to proceed to discharge your own obligation in the law. I think you would make reporting it as a separate.
Well, the obligation is that you have knowledge or suspicion that another person is engaged in money laundering. It's not that you think someone's planning to do it. So I'm not sure that.
He might be doing it.
He might already do. That's true. Yes, that's true. Yes, that's very true. Yeah, that is very true.
He might already be doing it in relation to this one.
Okay, so I think that's 3.2 probably adequately covered. Then 3.3 we've discussed, so that's just the issue of going back on all files of financial differences. What would you do about that?
You can't reach that client confidentiality.
No, that's right.
So they're not going to do that.
Yeah, that's right. And I guess also you should do a conflict check, because for all you know, your firm's, someone else in your firm is still acting for the vendor. So you need to make, and that's not relevant to the AML side, but that's obviously what that's getting at. Okay, then 3.4. This is somebody else. Let's have who hasn't I haven't picked one yet. Paula, have you answered one already? You have. Sorry, yes. Sorry, I can't quite remember who's who. I'll look at the list of names. Rachel, have you answered anything yet? No. Do you want to do 3.4? It's our old friend due diligence. By now, there's a certain pattern emerging here from these questions. Yep.
Standard. We want to set those where I'm going through general high due diligence points. Assuming that nothing comes up, we want to, well, we've already had it on time, ideally, but given that this new company is now any other.
Yep.
And see if that's right. Get like the articles. And assuming that that's all fine, then we look at perhaps source of funds into that company.
Well, you'd only need to do that if it was enhanced, wouldn't you? You don't look at source of funds if it's not enhanced. I mean, I'd say there's a sort of boilerplate approach to all these questions. I mean, it's easy to forget that, or to lose sight of that, they're looking for some quite basic things here. So you want to say, I'd look at the GFSE handbook to see what sort of identification documents I need. That'll be a passport. Just spell that stuff out. I mean, it sounds very basic, it's obvious, but to get them off, you need to just show, you know, I mean, every year what happens in the Guernsey bar is that very, very able people fail it, and some less able people, I shouldn't say fail it, pass it. And the reason for that is because the able people think, well, it's obviously, it's not, they're also looking for something fairly sophisticated, but they're not. They're looking for pretty basic, go through. So what you said is all absolutely right. But yeah, well, I'll just spell out really the building blocks. So I look at people, I'm careful with PB regs. I look at the handbook for information how to discharge that. I look at these 3 steps. This is standard enhanced body. Right? Just go through it all, spell it all, set it all out. And in a way, the question isn't really relevant. It's just an excuse to hang on that you know this stuff. That's really what they're looking for. That's my big tip to you. Don't you know, if you're knowledgeable, you've been applying this in practice particularly, it may not occur to you to spell out the basics because you think it's obvious, but actually that's what they're looking for to give you the mark. Just spell it all out as basic as possible.
Are we doing this? Sorry, says please write legibly. Are we all just doing everything on computer? Your handwriting? Who's doing computer? Who's handwriting? Oh, sorry.
I can't understand my own handwriting.
No, I can't. Well, I did. I couldn't understand. When I did the bar exam, my worst paper was the bailiff's paper. I got 50% on that, and that was actually the one that should have been the best one for me because my whole daily life was all about legislative drafting and all this sort of stuff. And started off, the reason for it was they just couldn't understand half of what I'd written. But the bit they could read, they thought sounded reasonable. So I probably deserved to pass. They were 50%. That was the reason for it. So I couldn't read it. I couldn't read it myself, looking back. That's because there were issues. I mean, because the day we did it, they didn't tell us properly that you had to set them. I also had to go back and write really quickly and rewrite stuff. So I had left margins. The whole thing was frenetic. So you were spared all that. I think it's a bit more orderly these days. We didn't have printed papers or anything. We had to write the full title. We were told we had to write the full title of Bailiff's paper. We'll talk every page we wrote on. We said, can we write Bailiff's? No, it's got the full title. So every page has right at the very top, constitutional, blah, 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 all this stuff. Every single page. Yes, and that's why, when I did that, I just could not read. I was trying to do the answers in that time. I couldn't, it was like, I couldn't read my own writing. So I think it was just, yeah.
Which is why I can't sit there on a computer and
I mean, I'm saying it to you, but I'm just jumping in. And maybe they'd be like, let's give him 50. We can't read his handwriting, but it could go the other way.
It could, yeah, it could.
Give him 49. We can't read his handwriting. No.
I mean, yeah, that's what I was told. I don't know if that made it entirely serious. I don't know, but I was just very struck by that should be my best paper by far, and it's the worst one I did. And then that's good because it's yeah, the 2 finger, yeah. Is that right, really? You'll get marked down?
really?
You have to go back and check on everything and double check. Gosh, that's...
You don't have to spell check.
Really? It was like a basic word.
Typing at speed for 3 hours, and you're expected not.
I'm worried about
Yeah, that does sound tough. Okay, but shall we just finish this question off?
Yeah, sorry.
Sorry, don't worry. No, I can understand why. Yeah, you're concerned. Okay, so then the next one. So 3-4, we've been through that. That's the standard CDD question. That is the CDD question. So whenever you get the CDD question, so just go through all those points. Chuck in a sanctions check as well. Probably not a sanctions issue here, but there's no harm in saying I've run his name through. Well, check, make sure there's no sanctions issue. Okay, then 3-5.
Can I just double check? I know it down. I think you mentioned like structured chart with any other shareholders, but also would you need to be CDD on the other directors as well? Yes, or are you running their names in the same sheet?
Yeah, you would have, yeah, because yeah, he might have, you know, his business partner might be Osama bin Laden's nephew or something, so you can make sure that
And the shareholders as well.
Yeah. Yeah, well, any underlying owners, yeah. Well, no, it's not 10%. No, it used to be. It's 25%. Well, the beneficial ownership, that's different. That's a registration of beneficial ownership under the registration, which is not quite the same thing. But you would need but yes, it'd be anyone with 25% holding, but also any other person who otherwise exercises control over the company. And the classic example I always give is the Vladimir Putin chauffeur, that you've got someone who owns a company 90%, he's got no source of money, and he works for Vladimir Putin. It's a fair bet that he is not the only person in control of that company. So you need to look beyond. So it's that sort of thing. So okay, so question 3.5. Let's have he hasn't spoken yet. Has so now. Oliver, 3.5.
Pretty suspicious transaction. Been paying the purchase considerations for vendors without really much documentation behind it. So explains the timing issue. The company trades in China. Again, that's raised issues of suspicion. He wants to avoid potential civil claim in that jurisdiction. So it sounds like you paid him the money in order that he'll go through so he doesn't face some sort of litigation in China.
Yeah, or is it money? Is it simple money laundering? Money laundering. Yeah, I mean, it looks very odd, doesn't it? Yeah. All those sort of issues come to mind. Looking at that, it looks very strange. Also, I don't quite understand. This may just be a mistake in the question, but it says this company trades in China, but the company's only just been incorporated to buy the hotel, so I'm not quite sure what it's doing trading in China. It doesn't make any sense to me. So. Yeah.
He was just operating a business in a company name which will be incorporated.
Yeah, but so I'm not sure which company's trading in China. What company they're talking about?
The vendor. Will be a company.
Yeah, but they're not a company. They're trading their own name. They're trading in their own names. So it's not clear what company. That might be a mistake in the question. Just like it happened, they set the question, haven't read it through probably. But it's not clear what company that is. And the only company we've been told about is the one that's been incorporated to buy the business. So why is it trading in China? None of that makes any sense. So just look into that. Yeah. That's the next. It kind of bleeds into the next question. If you're suspicious, what do you do? Yeah, just stuff. Any things you should not do. Tipping off. Yeah. When it says to whom do you report the matter, bless you. What do you expect to happen? I assume that means you expect your MLRO to make a report to FIS, so that's what we're getting at. And you should, and you have to say, would you the same thing again to show you what the framework says. If you have doubts about it, you should decline the business but still make the report. Just spell it out each time it comes up. Okay, any other questions on that? I mean, that's quite a chunky question. 28 marks. That's quite a lot to get. I mean, I really have to work quite hard to get enough out to justify that.
Yeah, I mean, you're spending the bulk of your time with them.
Yeah. Half an hour. That's why I say it's always worth. There's a lot of what they call low-hanging fruit in the exams. It's always worth spelling out the basics of the framework. They'll go tick, 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 and you get the point. If you don't assume the examiner knows anything, it's easy to do that if you work in everything. It's obvious, but just always go back to basics, always spell out the steps. Okay, let's finally look at the exam paper from last year. Look at question 1, 16 marks. There's not much AML stuff here, but well, I should. Does anyone see any AML issues here? Let's start with Jasmine. Do you see any AML questions? Have a look through it and then say if you see any AML questions.
Quite a few marks.
I think obviously AML jumps out at me, to be honest.
No, I mean I think all you need to say there is
Professional conduct.
yeah, they are, but it is transactional work.
Yeah.
So you are obliged to apply the AML framework, but this is obviously a classic case of standard CDD. It's local residents buying a domestic property. So if you just say that, I think that's all you'll be required to say, really.
It's a bit odd. He's asking for a colleague. Why should he care? It's an odd thing. But that's the only. It's not that big possible.
Yeah. Well, I don't think that's what it's aimed at. I think, well, I agree that you could mention that, but I think that's probably more likely aimed at the conflict of interest point there. But just mention that because it is transactional, so you have got to apply the AML framework to this, but it's just standard, so standard CDD, so just say that. I think that's the only one thing you could say. But you know, you might. It's worth saying, I suppose. The fact he wants a colleague to act is slightly odd. I'd look into that. Make sure there's nothing suspicious about that. But otherwise, it just leads to conflict of interest points, and then that's what that question's really about. But I just let it in there as an example of how you need to touch on the AML aspect, even if it's just in passing, and I'll give you a couple more extra marks. You know, so even if that's not what they're looking for in here, I suspect whoever set this question didn't have AML in mind. It's giving you a couple of extra points. Two, I say. Two. Okay, then question 2, 20 marks here. This is a bit more substantial from the AML perspective. So let's have who hasn't spoken for a while. Let's have Ben. You just kick off for this one. Read it through first, and I'll have a look at it.
Some 2.1. If you just find out, then it's transactions within the AML framework. You need to determine whether it's standard or enhanced CDD, so you would want to know more about Charles and his brother Andrew.
Yeah. I mean, it could even be reduced CDD, simplified CDD, couldn't it? It's purely local transaction, local restaurant. It might not even be standard. It might be simplified. Sorry. Yeah. So, but you're right. The first thing is say, is it transactional? Yes. What kind of CDD would you look at? Just explain the 3 kinds and what you'd be looking at. Yep.
So you would need to look at, well, you need to look at, like I said, both Charles and his brother Andrew.
Indeed. Yep.
Depending on what level of CDD would you either just get ID documents and proof of address, or you might do something a little bit more enhanced on both of them. Depending on
Yeah,
what you figure
and
out.
and it's worth just saying, I would look at the handbook for guidance.
Yeah.
Just drop that in there.
In terms of otherwise, what steps you would take otherwise, I guess that's not really AML stuff. So we can skip that.
Yeah, that I think that's about make sure that the brother's on board and he's done fully properly advised. That's what that's about, I think. But yeah, like that. Yeah.
There is. I would just go back, and I said it already, but understand the purpose of the transaction. I think that's what the complexity of the question is asking you to ask.
Yeah.
It seems to me.
Yeah. What's the reason for it? Yeah.
You're splitting out the restaurant piece from each other. So they're just trying to could be an
Yeah. Yeah.
exercise. So maybe that's you just get to grips with the purpose of it.
This is yeah.
And on restaurants, sort of cash generating businesses. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. That's a recognised form of money laundering, high turnover cash businesses. Yeah. I mean, you're looking for 12 marks here, so you've got quite a lot of material down.
Yeah, yeah.
I think that was what you've just said between you would probably get you there, because you've got the nuts and bolts of the framework in place. You spotted things that are likely to make the thing more complex, and you've seen the possible money laundering angle through cash business. So that's all good stuff.
I can't remember if we what about like arm's length as a sort of measure of suspicion? Do we kind of touch on that in terms of actually assessing this, being suspicious has a way of generating a suspicion, as it were. So, for example, in the last question that popped up, it's like, this question is like, changing stuff like that. Would you get credit for saying this? I want to make sure. I'd like to understand if this is arm's length, and if it's not arm's length, the basis for that, stuff like that, without going too far into understanding.
Well, I don't think it's going too far. No, there's no harm in saying that. I mean,
But do you? I mean, is that in terms of the legal framework? Is that?
I'm not sure what you mean. Sorry.
Well, this may or may not be an arm's length transaction. I'm just wondering if we mention or if I'm just getting over exercised about it. Is it? Forgive me, I don't know if you touched on it in the classes. Arm's length, assessing the arm's lengthness.
No, we haven't looked at that. No, I mean that's not the framework doesn't expressly talk about that, but it was something to look at in the overall assessment of why it's being done. What's the business reason for this? What's the purpose of it? And when we spoke about layering in the introductory session last time, you may remember that I said that one of the issues I look at is if things are being transferred between different entities for different reasons, breaking out, there has to be a business reason for that. If there isn't one, then that raises a question of money laundering. If people are doing it to try and just put distance between, or put complexity in place, so then it's no obvious reason, that you have to ask why that was. And most of the time there will be a good business reason, but if there isn't, then that does raise some questions. So you need to look into all of that and satisfy yourself that there was a valid business reason for why they were doing it. Okay, then 2.2, the guarantee. Let's have Paula, guarantee.
You would need to consider the debt CTD from the guarantor.
Yep.
Well, so if
Object.
yes,
I think also this is a one part question, but one part ethics.
That's right.
Oh, yeah,
question as well,
yeah.
because there's a conflict there.
Yeah, correct.
I thought we just focused on the.
Yeah, no, sorry, I just wanted to-
Yeah, and it's only 4 marks, and they're not looking for
Yeah.
much in detail. Just to, But yeah, it's basically that you have to
All the usual CBD stuff. But on
on the guarantor, yeah. And again, it's not just the CDG stuff, it's also the fact that there's a potential money laundering issue here, because why is he doing that? Why is somebody going behind the scenes that using these people as essentially frontmen? Is there a money laundering issue here? Or TF issue, less likely, but is there some other, you know, nefarious reason why this is being done?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, yes, it's, yeah. All those things that are red flags from the handbook that would come up here. And also, there's nothing here, I can't do the same paper, but there's nothing else on this paper, I think, about, so you might also mention making a report of suspicion. That's not, there's no question about that in this particular question. Suspicion is not raised, so you just chuck in that if you were suspicious about having done these checks, if you were suspicious, you make a report to MRO. Just mention the fact you know that. Mark. And then 2.3, that I don't think that's an AML question. I'm not quite sure what that's aimed at actually. 2.3 about the guarantor previously being involved without good standing. But I don't think that's an AML issue, so don't worry about that one. Okay, we've got 10 minutes left for the last one. So let's look at question 3. Have a look at question 3 over the page. Okay, let's have Oliver. What do you think this one's about?
It's a transaction. Look at women's backgrounds and decide whether it's PEP and what due diligence we need on them. Depending on what it is, if it's standard or enhanced. Transaction is involving a number of Middle East jurisdictions. I'd like to know what jurisdictions those are. Is sanctions checks.
And terrorist financing check as well.
And terrorist financing checks. Client calling up and asking for bank details, but he hasn't received any draft licensing software. That's rather odd. Paying money for essentially nothing yet, so money laundering issues.
It is absolutely. Sorry?
Potential criminal issue that using your business address falsely to get people to, as much as it's money laundering because it's coming potentially into your firm's bank account, also somebody using your practicing address
Yeah, so it's fraud issues. Yeah. No, I agree. Yeah.
I wouldn't necessarily have gone through all that minimum step.
No, I mean,
It's what action should the accounts department take? I wouldn't have thought the accounts
No,
deal with CUD.
I just not back.
I would have said one about the suspicious transaction.
Yeah.
I don't know, it's worth
Yeah, it's hard to know because the way the questions are
I
structured.
thought that first.
it's hard to know.
Sorry to interrupt. I thought that first, but actually, I think.
It does say
Thinking
what
quite
action
methodical. Obviously, quite a methodical approach, and actually, if you just
that
relate,
happens,
if you just laid that out, and that gives you, that informs the action that the account department should take, right? So like, it could just be, in other circumstances, this could just be a clerical error, and you could actually be satisfied that actually it was not untoward for whatever reason, hypothetically, but actually in the circumstances, you've got trigger suspicion. But you
Yeah,
gotta
I
need to
think
go
it's a red,
through.
but I think it's a red flag first. My first thing wouldn't be like, if we know something to take CDD, my first thing would be investigate what looks really suspicious and potentially criminal.
I think
you receive funds, you want to probably bill to accounts department to return those funds, you want to make
Well, you wouldn't
reports.
return them necessarily, but I think you should, I think you skip the CDD bit.
I don't know, but you're right, you may then say, but if everything turns out fine, then obviously.
I think you just need to.
It's hard to know. I think the fact that it mentions the Middle East makes me think that it's trying to get at the stuff you were talking
It's
about.
just a red herring.
It could be. It could be.
You went to going down that.
Well, it could be. I mean, the trouble is, it's very hard to know. That's why going to the bar exam is often a bit of a difficult thing to gauge. I would say there's no harm putting up those things. I think it's very worth it, because if that's what they're looking for, you'll need to have that written down. And I think the issue about the TF and the sanctions link in particular, given it's in the Middle East, I think it's very important to bring that out. Because what action the accounts department would take and what action should you take, they're both in there. It's not just the accounts, it's both. So what should you do if you discover this? It looks like something very odd is going on, so you need to investigate all of that.
28
I agree, yes, I agree, yeah, I agree. Well, I mean, one of the other issues is that you get, where the signs historically have been set, is you'll get different people doing different questions and don't always liaise. I mean, when I did the bailiff's paper, quite apart from that, my handwriting, we had, I think, 3 different questions asking about the constitutional relationship with the UK in different ways. It's basically the same question, 3 different ways, because different people who asked set questions, they all put a question in, and there wasn't any, as far as I can tell, there was no process. So I was like, hang on, that's going to be a different one, because that's the same question as he's asked. So you end up, so that's quite confusing. Yeah. So I mean, maybe
repeated.
maybe different now because they're trying to improve the process, but it's all a bit random.
You don't bank it, you're going to take it, yeah.
Oh, it's a check.
You
wouldn't even accept mine.
No, you
Well,
would take it.
you can't refuse a wire, but you can't not write it, right?
You can't refuse, why?
Don't think so.
You can send it back, but you can't.
And if someone doesn't read it.
Well, yeah, you can just go in and manage your.
So I know the hard
There's a risk of tipping off.
If you're not heard,
Obligation to them.
where's the line on ticking off?
Yeah, well, that's a very good question. It's really one of those things that it is a tightrope for everybody because like I said, they're not really looking for a right or wrong answer. What they're looking for is that you understand the things that you need to be aware of and what the framework says. That's really what they're looking for. But it's a judgment. All these things, as is the case in practice in real life, as all the who already work practice will know, it's often a judgment call where things fall, which side of the line you go down. But what they're looking for here is to know that you understand what the legal obligations are and the sort of things you'd be considering. Okay, well, we've sort of come to the end of final time. Any questions before we wrap up? And do those who do the criminal paper want to carry straight on with the criminal paper, or would you rather have a break? Okay, fine.
What's the actual answer? What is your requirement?
Sorry, what's the answer?
What should your?
Well, they shouldn't bank the check, no. But no, I would agree with that. Yeah. So
you should always do this immediate steps because we could do. I think it's standard.
oh, at the time you do it, you mean?
Yeah,
The time,
yeah.
yes. I'm not quite sure this myself. I mean,
Normally it's registered for.
yeah, that's right. Yes. Yeah. I think a lot of those things are there. Yeah, I have no knowledge of that ever having been applied in practice. I think it's just there to prevent injustice, basically. If something happens that I can't think of an example, but just to make sure the framework has sufficient flexibility to avoid a situation where someone might be caught.
Yeah.
I mean, same as failure to report suspicion. The legislation says you have to report as soon as possible unless it's a good reason otherwise. Now, people say, what would a good reason be? I've never come across that in practice, but I suppose you might, if you had a heart attack on the way to make your report, whatever, or your computer crashed, you would have gone for it, it hadn't, or whatever. It's just there it's just there so that there is the system has sufficient flexibility. If something did arise like that you could deal with it. I think that's what it's there for. But in the reality, you'd be expected to do it at that time. So how many people are doing a criminal paper? I've forgotten. Just 2 of you, 3 of you.
Just one last question, very, very high level. We shouldn't expect any discursive essay type question. It's like it could come up, right?
Yeah, I've never seen one on the ethics. I've seen it on the criminal paper because on the syllabus the criminal paper has the AML world and how we fit into it. So often there are questions: how would you explain Gerg's AML framework essay type? I've never seen it on the ethics paper, but who knows? Because the whole thing's being changed. I doubt there will be that because it's the same person setting it. So I think it'll be a rehash of all these things. You get a client from a dodgy looking place. What do you do? It'll be that. I'm pretty sure it'll be that. So I would just make sure when you revise, you have absolutely fixed in your head the different criteria for standard enhanced and simplified CDD, what we have to do, and just make sure you know that really, really strongly, and then and have in your head the checklist you'd go through, and then just put it down, and then that'll give you enough of a framework to go through.
So our next one was it's just the handbook. Are we meant to use and apply the new handbook? Are we not?
Well, yeah,
And that's quite a specific question, so hopefully they'll be able to.
You were told that we wouldn't need to know the new handbook.
Yeah. Well, I didn't specifically have the handbook. I just said, I know there are changes to the AML framework. Do we have to look at any of that? That will include the handbook. Any of that, or is it as it currently is? And he said, no, it's as it. Because I said, well, I think it's. My own view was there wasn't much point teaching people a framework that was going to be obsolete by the time they started practicing. But I was told, no, if we as it was in July, and that's what I was told. So that's how I've structured the whole of my approach to this.
When did it change?
When did what? The handbook, sorry.
No, it's not the rate where the rate change.
Yeah, it's very recent. It's very recent. Yeah.
Okay, so yeah. So what you applied for the
November, December. Yeah.
We were told on the old rules, but actually
yeah, but actually, as you click in these questions, there's not really much scope for drilling down to the details. I mean, if you just say, I would check in the handbook for what sort of thing to do, that's all you need to say. Say again, sorry. What, for the exam, do you mean, or for practice? I don't know. I think it'd be quite. I think the handbook is useful if you could dig out a couple of examples of you know, the kind of things they would count as identification documents, just like passports. It's some specifics. I just know that kind of thing, but I don't think really you need to be able to say, you know, Part 5 deals with this, and they're not really. Yeah.
You know, do we need to know that level of detail?
Well, I've never seen that, and I'm not asking the question, that's the problem I've got, but I've never seen that in, I believe it's Alan Merrion from Randall and Loveridge, and I believe it's being second marked by Professor McPeak.
You won't even talk to him about any revision.
Well, I've tried to find out from him. I emailed him earlier in the week to try to find out whether he was going to adopt the same approach, but I didn't know. So I don't know. Sorry? Well, that's a good question. I asked that question for example, and I was told that it's still available on the GFSC website. It will be for quite a long time as a transitional arrangement. Yeah, so you should be able to have access to it. But
I mean, I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but you could ask. Like, we can just go straight to the source.
Yeah. I don't think that's for me to go straight.
No, I have been. Well, I'll tell you what I'll do. I emailed him myself to say when I found he was setting it again, and I said it'd be helpful to structure the session today just to know, is it going to be a very similar format to previous years or something totally different? It's totally different. There's no point going through past papers in detail. He hasn't come back to me yet. But when it's but if he does come back, and say it's going to be similar to previous years, I would say to him, are you happy for me to share that knowledge with the students? Because obviously that affects the whole revision session is sort of structured around past papers. And if he says, yeah, you can pass it, I'll let you know.
In terms of that, I'm thinking now, because Gordon, I just whispering to John, I'd rather not go to Gordon. So that way, and then there's no.
How do I put this on? How do I put this off? I don't know how to turn this.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're not going to need to know what's different details. It's going to be, the question's going to be on CDD. That's the message that comes up. But you see, these are pretty high level questions. You know,
absolutely.
That's as if it's still the same format as that, which I'm sure it will be. And if it's not, I'll let you know if he says it's different. But as long as you go through that process, you'll be all right. Sorry, say again. Well, if I tell you what I do, if he comes back and says it's going to be a totally different structure, then I think I would say to him, yeah, I will then liaise with the GTA and see if we can have another session on that. Because otherwise, it's not really fair if you approach it in this way. And it's like, but I don't think it will be, because I don't imagine he'll change his whole approach. I'd be surprised, but I'll let you know. Yeah, you're not going to get an essay saying explain the difference between the old handbook and the new handbook. You're not going to get that. I mean, I say that now, but I'll eat my words and the paper comes up. Okay, good luck everybody, and like I said before, if you have any questions that come up when you start, just email me, that's fine. And it will be over soon, hold that thought, it will be over soon. Another thing I'd say as well is if even if it doesn't go well and you have to do a resit, no one gives the monkeys. In 5 years' time, no one's going to remember. No one's going to say that person failed the bar exam. There are plenty of people on this island who failed more than one paper, had to do it 2 or 3 times. They're fantastic. Have gone for fantastic careers. No one cares. So don't.
So did it always eventually pass?
Yeah. Yeah. No, honestly.
Only making something for free time.
Yeah. No, but I mean, quite seriously, you know, I know it's easy to say, and I, you know, when I was doing it, I got so stressed when I was doing it. I'm realising I tried to withdraw. So I thought, yeah, I did, yeah, I hated it. Yeah. And the only reason I didn't was because, so I shouldn't have said something. I'll turn this off. Not this, it's controversial.
No one's going to notice after all my swearing.
Yeah. But basically, what happened was when I applied for the bar exam, well, I was entered for it. It happened quite late because one of my colleagues was doing it. He dropped out, so my boss said to me, "Do you want to go in his slot instead?" I said, "Okay, fine." But he hadn't registered me as a pupil, so he had to then. The letter hadn't gone. There was some mistake, whatever it was. So he had to go and get a special dispensation from the bailiff to let me sit the exam. So that having happened, I felt I couldn't then really say. Well, I started realising I'm not going to do it, so I had to go through it. But I found the whole process to work out what the exams were going to be asking. It was impossible to work out. It was so stressful that I said, actually, bugger this, I'm not going to do it. But I thought I can't withdraw because I had to go cab out of the bed and get permission, so that's why I did it. And I passed, not with any great glory, but I got through them.
Wednesday night, we had an email from the board saying bailiff's study guide was given.
That's an extra guide.
But I had got up to chapter 12. That bracket, because at chapter 1 to 11 scrubbed almost entirely.
Yeah,
Scrubbed completely.
Yeah.
And instead go and read Darrell Lucia's book, chapter 6 and 9.
Because the law officers don't have time to review.
Yeah. Absolutely, yes. There's this appendix and then there's that. I actually cried.
Yeah, I don't blame you. That's really hard, really hard. In fact, I did mean to say actually before everyone went, I forgot to say this, but I'm not involved in technical papers at all, or the bailiff stuff. My guess would be if on the bailiff's paper, I think it's quite likely to be a question on the relationship with the UK and like what's happened recently with the registers. So
in my experience of the process, it's the process that's stressful. It's not the material we're learning. It's not.
Yeah, I totally agree. I totally agree. Yeah, completely.
That's what. How long it's going to be?
Yeah.
It's these changes that's making it stressful.
Yeah, I know. I totally agree.
Not
Yeah.
just going down and revising.
Yeah.
Exactly. We've done that so many times.
Yeah. Oh, I know. Well, when I did the bar exam, the year before, there were some complaints about the questions, and the bailiff's paper in particular. There'd been like 6 files of documents to read for one question. People complained, "This is ridiculous. You can't possibly read this draft legislation for whatever in the time frame." So, because there were a lot of complaints about it, the year I did it, they got some poor hapless chap to come along and give us a talk about exam technique. And we were saying, we don't need professional people. We've done exams. We know how to do this. The issue is not with us. The issue is with the exam process. It's with the exam setters being set these ridiculous questions. You've got 30 minutes to answer a question, which requires reading 2 files of material and you're given for the first time in the exam. It's nonsense. So this poor guy ended up saying, "Well, sorry, I can't really help you." So we're saying we don't need help with how to revise and study. We know how to do that. The issue is not with us. But I think that is one of those things that they are trying to address. But unfortunately, your year is the kind of beginning of the year, which is.
This is how did it work for you?
Yeah.
But for example, if you've got an exam and you're going to be given materials, we only just found out you will be given materials. We also can't tell you which materials are. So that gives you a question.
Yeah.
But up until then, you have no idea if you're going to get full A's in the criminal exam or you're going to get, an equivalent in the civil exam.
Yeah. No, I know. You don't know. I know. But I mean, I may be wrong, but my guess would be as well, this may work to your advantage actually, because I think they'll be quite lucky to fail people. Unless your paper's really egregiously bad.
I know, but then I've just heard it's bad, in which case, if you fail, I'll make it out.
Well, if you had a question about, let's say, take the AML example, let's say egregiously bad, if you had a question saying, someone comes to you, wanted to buy a company, they're from the Middle East, the check comes on his name, and you don't mention CDD, you don't mention money laundering, whatever. Yeah. No, I think if your answer wasn't even the right area, you hadn't got a clue about any of this stuff, then they're not going to you. But I think if you make a reasonable stab at it, it's clear you have got a rough idea of the sort of things that they're looking for.
Yeah. But nobody ever knows the passport unless we tell them. It's not as if.
No, they're not. No, they're not interested.
Everyone says, you really. Oh, yeah.
Just get across the line. Yeah.
Yeah. Because it's not an academic paper.
No, it's not. Not at all. No, it's not.
Is it? I don't know, because we've been told country things.
Well,
you know,
I think all the things like.
No, quite right. Yeah, well, litigation is the chief.
But you'll be fine. Honestly, it's my sense of what it's worth, and there's some things you've been saying in these sessions. I think you've all got a pretty good grasp of what sort of things they're looking for, and I think just stick with that, you'll be all right. For this area, I mean, I'm not speaking more widely, but if that's an indication of your approach, I think you'll be fine. And I don't think that they're going to want to fail people very easily because they'll be worried about the effect, because it's an experimental stage of the process. So, yeah, so unless it's, that's my sense anyway. Okay, good luck, everybody. Good luck. And good luck with baby, that's very exciting. So you're first?
Yes.
Yeah. So what's the due date? 7th May.
I'm trying to maybe it comes soon. The later it comes closer to 3 years.
Yeah. I heard that when they're being sent. Yeah. To hang over you at the time of the birth, yeah, you don't really.
Talk to Alex, does he want to take that bridge? You have to, I think you have to borrow Alana's car. Don't worry about it, yeah, fine. Yeah, come around.
Good luck.
Bye, guys. See you later. See you later. Thank you again, Kate.
That's a pleasure, yeah. If there's any queries, just let me know. I'll do my best to answer.
I don't mean to put you on the spot, but
If you could break into the safe and see the questions, that'd be really helpful, yeah.
How's it going? Still panic mode. Yeah. I think there are some people who I remember found great relish telling me that all the Morgans fail to apply. Yes.
We've got good email through the paper. I was just like, oh,
with the new bailiffs.
Yeah.
You're okay with that? Yeah. Yeah.
Have you looked at the changes?
Yeah, it's a public painting. Markup. You're like, somebody just.
Really?
Oh, you haven't looked at it?
Well, I can't look at it on screen, but I'll go and print it off in the office in a minute. They prefer this thing, like a something.
What's that thing? How do you know that?
It's all about EU and the impact of Brexit, which we're definitely not going to be asked questions. Yeah. Oh, well.
What, the cookies? I'm certainly going to go back to the third. Holy shit. Yeah.
Yeah, John's going to get like updated.
Yeah, he was quite concerned. Yeah, he sent me a very concerned email, so I called him. John, what's his last name? John. Is he corporate? Yeah. At Kerry Olsen. So I sent an email around to the people doing. Are you doing column share or not? Well, you've done it. That's right. You did it with. Yeah, of course, please. Yeah, you did it with Hydra. So I sent an email around. We're trying to just make it so people know what's going on and sort of understand what they're walking into, etc. So I sent an email around to this year's column cohort, seeing all of the guys from last year and just talking a little bit about things. And John from Kerry Olsen sent me a very concerned email. And I was worried about. I can't even remember what the email was about. I called him because he was obviously.
I think the thing is, he's quite enthusiastic.
Oh, it's a concept. Yeah, I absolutely agree. Oh,
Are you guys going to Caen? Are you going shortly then? No, I loved Caen. I must say, I loved it absolutely. Is it? Is that what it is? I'd love to go, but I had a great time. So it was brilliant.
I'd like to go back on holiday.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Well, I used to go down. We were there for 4 months. I used to go down to Paris and look around and travel to Rome. It was fantastic. My French wasn't bad. I did over French. I worked in France, so the language wasn't an issue. And the actual content of the course is very basic. So if you've got the language skills, it was adult. It's like a holiday, really. My boss said to me, he said, "You're about to have a 4-month holiday in France, courtesy of the taxpayer." And that's really what it felt like. No, it's a beautiful city, it really is. And safety's really nice. And
yeah, we had there's a new woman who did obligations. Madame Legrand. She is quite intense, but actually really nice. But she's very nice to us. She was very, I wouldn't say cruel, but she was tough on the students.
Yeah. They're foreign students, aren't they?
Yeah.
We have one, she didn't turn up for the first 2 tutorials.
And Madame Legrand did not.
I've got some there. I'll hand these round as well. I've got no copies.
Sophie told us, Sophie had the deputy in common.
Oh, really?
So she's been doing it for a while. And even then, he was, everyone was saying, "Oh, that's future Baylor."
Oh, really?
Even then, so she thought, when he was a student, she told us, she said, "I thought that was very odd because I didn't think that they were moving on."
Yeah.
But that was the view of even when it's just a guy sitting in the closet.
Right, wow. Sorry, say again. No, I just no, it's visual, that's fine. Yeah, sure.
Is that it?
Yeah. There we go, these are the ethics ones. I just put them off the website from the GTA website just to look just the questions. Sophie, yeah. She is really nice, and I'd say that we can't. The key to passing that, if you haven't got loads of French, is to just turn up to everything and show interest.
So I'm hoping that based on your experience, turning up and being interested will be.
And I understand that whilst you guys are going to have written exams, they're not going to be significantly different than the oral exams that we had. And
they're in English, aren't they? Written exams in English, yeah.
So you will have to know some French, but I just opened and 20 or 30 bits of customary law text. I don't know the word, I just memorized it. When I see this, that's talking about something else.
Yeah.
That's something else.
I mean, again, the content is pretty basic. It's not looking for great analysis of legal questions. It's just really understanding the language, which is what it came down to, really.
Well,
So,
that's good, because in our alternate course, we use it every week. Fantastic 2 hours on a Monday evening.
so just the 4 of us doing this one. Just yeah, okay. Because of.
I've only got 4. How many of it?
Okay, well, before we kick off, sorry. Yeah, I think so. I haven't stopped. God knows what's on there. I have to think me tucking into biscuits and stuff. But... Have anyone got any questions before we start going through these papers? Anything that's arisen in the course of your studies that you want to talk about or ask about? No? No? Okay, fine. Okay. I'm secretly taking notes. I can feed it into the examiners. So they haven't got a clue.
I might just think, watch things.
Let's start with this one here. It's headed question 2. You're representing Guernsey at an international AML event. So have a look at that, read through that, and then we'll talk about that. Just read A, I'm not looking at B and C. Okay, I won't pick on people. There's only 4 of you, so it's a bit harsh. So, someone volunteer to talk through that one?
This is a bit more of an essay question.
This one is, yeah.
It's not going to be in any kind of order, this is just as I remember things. But I guess you'd start by outlining the regime itself, so say that we have the proceeds of crime legislation, we've got the prescribed business regulations, we've got our Moneyval 2016 report, which govern how we do things. And I'm not sure if it says when works in practice, you'd go through a bit of a example of a client maybe, and then external validation.
I think that's more to do with the Moneyval report, to be honest. They're looking, I think my advice on this one, because I think you may well get a question like this, because this type of thing comes from lots of papers explaining the AML regime, essentially, different formats. But this is, I think the stuff you've covered is all correct, but I would just order it. As you say, I recognise you weren't doing it to order, but I'll just, my advice would be that the order I think you should follow, if you get this kind of question, is to replicate the approach I put in the opening section of the materials, the overview of AML. So we say we've got preventive measures, which is the AML framework for lawyers, accountants and FSBs. And we've got the oppressive measures, which are the offences and the asset recovery measures, got all that stuff. And we fully comply with the FATF standards. And that's what our framework is designed to do. And we provide assistance to other countries. So the sort of overview stuff that I put in the introduction to AML, that's really, I think, what this is aimed at, quite high level. And then in terms of external validation, that would be our IMF reports from 2004, 2003, 2010, and the Moneyval report in 2016.
So the Moneyval report was when they came in and basically assessed what our regime was. And then as a result of that, we can say that their findings were positive.
Yeah, we've got a very clean bill of health, which we've had before from the IMF in 2004, 2003, I think it's in my note anyway, and then the IMF again in 2010. So we have been thoroughly evaluated 3 times by external bodies for our compliance with the FATF standards, and each time we've got a very, very good outcome. So that's what we're looking for external validation. That's basically what it is. So you need to talk here. You talk here about the FATF standards, the fact that we have our regime compliant with them. And it's in, broadly speaking, 2 parts: the preventive side and the repressive side, and how it works in practice. And then you could that. I'm not sure what they mean by how does it work in practice.
But that's what I think is you need to provide some kind of example.
I think that would be a good idea. Yeah, I mean, you're talking about 10 marks here for this. So I'd say they're looking probably for. There are 3 bits. They're not necessarily probably 3 marks for each bit, broadly speaking, 3.5 marks, whatever. So I think you could say in practice, yes, firms do X, Y, Z. This is what they do. The authorities bring money laundering prosecutions. They give assistance for their countries. So the framework's actually used in practice, and it's been validated.
How do we engage with authorities? Just through the law offices?
Yeah, the mutual legal assistance process. Yeah, that we give assistance. Yeah, and also the FIU, the FIS, they give information to other FIUs around the world. So that's the engagement that way as well. Yeah, you talk there about the reporting regime. All the sort of, if you go back to the overview stuff in my notes, and it's all like, that's really what they're looking for this question. I wrote that bit with this kind of question in mind because I knew they asked this sort of thing.
When they say relevant legislation, is that just the FATF standing, or is it
No, they're talking about Guernsey legislation. I mean, the FATF standards are what our legal framework is designed to meet.
This is our handbook then?
Yeah, yes. What you said, the nuts and bolts of the framework really are the approaches of crime law, the drug trafficking law, and the regulations made under those enactments. That's essentially the nuts and bolts of it. Those are the 3 key pieces. Oh, the terrorist financing law as well, terrorism law. So, I mean, the FATF standards, they're not legislation, they're just the international standards we have to meet, but you need to show you know that. That's why we've got all this stuff, to meet those standards. But if you look at my notes, paragraph 212 onwards, 212, that gives you a very basic overview and there's a bit there about in 213 about lawyers. That's a bit more detail than you would need for this question. But basically speaking, this is roughly what you need to know. So you've got you've got this legislation, you've got a repressive and a preventive framework. And the preventive side applies to financial services businesses, lawyers, accountants, estate agents, and the repressive side applies to everybody, so the offences. And we have measures to give effect to the reporting regime, and we have a process for assisting other jurisdictions. That's the kind of thing they're looking for, basically. So it's just an overview, really, of the framework.
So actually, if a similar question came up, it could be for a lot more content. You could go into more detail. Or would it always just be an overview? Well,
I don't know. I mean, it depends how it's set, but I would say the overview is always going to be roughly the same. It's always going to be that, isn't it? So you understand that there's an international standard setting body. Guernsey meets those standards. It does it in these ways. These are the key enactments that do that. And it's applied in practice effectively. And you can give an LZM how it works if you're, to give an example of applying CDD or whatever. And then it's been validated by external bodies several times and rules come out spelling of roses. You could say we joined Moneyval in 2012, if you wanted to mention that. So any questions about that one? Any other questions on that one? No, okay. Let's look at a more practically based one now, which is question 4, so the paper headed question 4 brackets 25 marks. Now, the reason I chose this one is because although this is from one of the criminal papers, I forget which year, but it seems to me to be pretty much based on sort of CDD type stuff. It's an odd question because it doesn't seem to be about the criminal framework as such. It seems to repeat a lot of the stuff you would need for the ethics paper. So just be aware that you might have the same issues coming up there. So let's read through question 4 and then we'll have a crack at talking it through. Okay, someone to kick off with the 4-1?
I mean, would you just go for, yes, might be a PEP, and so you've got to do enhanced CDD, and then go through if there's sanctions on Russia.
Enhanced CDD, that's just source of funds.
Enhanced CDD is senior management approval, source of funds, and I forget the third list. Myself.
A source of wealth as well, source of funds and source of wealth.
Yeah, so that's why she'll have the same thing, really. Yeah, where the money's coming from, both. Yeah, it is both. And then, sorry, I forget the third one. I don't remember my notes. I forget what it is. Yes, source of wealth or funds, and then carrying out more extensive monitoring and taking additional steps to verify and understand the nature and purpose of the business relationships. You have to take extra steps to find out. But yeah, and then we're talking about 4 marks there. So all they're really looking for is saying that actually, yes, the point to bear in mind here, of course, is you're not, although you're in-house counsel, the bank, this isn't about whether or not it's transactional work from a legal perspective. This is banking works. This is financial services business. So it doesn't matter whether it's transactional or not, they've got to do this for their clients. Because it's actually advising the bank. What does the bank do, not what you should do, because you're not doing this as a lawyer, you're doing this as advising the bank.
Money coming in from different accounts, but if not, we wouldn't be going far into it in terms of going through national, etc. We wouldn't necessarily be structuring concerning.
Well, it's only 4 marks here. I'm not quite sure what this is really about on the criminal paper, but I would say you do need to, I think you will still need to say you understand the different kinds of CDD. The issue about whether it's transactional only applies to lawyers. Because, but if you're a financial services business, you're definitely covered by the regulation, which the bank is. So that doesn't matter, but everything else is the same. So you'd be looking at whether or not the bank should consider when taking on is exactly the same as enhanced CDD. He's clearly a pet because he was still very recently the minister for Russian minister. So he's clearly a pet. So you can go straight, you know, it's enhanced CDD. That's what this is really about, I think. The fact that it's 4 marks makes me think that what they want you to say is enhanced CDD. So, and name the breakdown what that is. So source of wealth or funds, senior management approval, enhanced monitoring and enhanced investigation to what the purpose of the transaction is. And any sanctions issues, because obviously there are Russian sanctions, you said there are sanctions on Russia, so is he on the sanctions list? I would say so, that should be, yeah. Famous last words, I know. So that's that one. So let's move on to the next bit. I don't know if we've got any more questions on that. I mean, if you look at the marks, it's interesting because there's a lot of text to read here, but actually the marks aren't particularly extensive for each section. There's a lot of text to read here, but actually, if you break it down, you're looking for 3 points really in the next section. So read through that, and then we'll have a talk about what you think those 3, what you think needs to come out of that.
Sorry, quick question. The February 2013, is this potentially because it was the 2014 exams, or is that going to play a part in our answers? Time limits or anything like that?
I can't really see why the timing is relevant. It probably, well, no, I didn't go back to that far. The earliest paper I got was 2016.
So yeah.
So I'm not quite sure why that's relevant. Actually, I can't immediately see why that would be. I mean, sometimes people just put stuff in the questions to make it a bit more interesting. So it's hard to know whether it's there for a reason or just because they're trying to make the question a bit more.
Bit of a flourish.
Yeah, I mean, it could well be that, you know. So yeah. But I can't. No immediate legal changes or anything spring out to me or cases that around that time, when those time is relevant. I can't think of anything. Okay, so 3 marks there. Who wants to have a crack at that?
I think it's probably sufficient to file that SAR with the FIS.
Yeah, I'd agree.
Beyond that,
Then explain your suspicions.
But make Friday actually respect returns. So we're concerned they're transferring the money out when nothing else is coming in. He's probably been indicted and what is that's of interest.
So it's probably going to be a process of corruption, isn't it? It's probably what's happened here. He's probably misappropriated state assets. That's probably what's happened. But it looks like. So yes, you'd advise the MLRO to make a report of suspicion and not to tip off, obviously. You'd advise the MLRO to be careful about tipping off.
Essentially, they've put in this £13 million and then it's coming out of the bank account clean a month. 300k.
It's what, sorry? It's
coming out of the bank account from the
going to
clean, but nothing else is going in, so there's not actually any.
So it looks as if it looks like a money laundering scheme, doesn't it? It looks as if he's setting up a bank account here in Guernsey, so that when it's money received in London, it will look like it's legitimate, but in fact it probably isn't. It's a money laundering scheme. So you'd advise MLRO to make a report of suspicion to FIS, obviously not to tip off, and your reasons would be, for those reasons, it looks very odd, and he's been alleged to be involved in improper sale of mining or the concessions, so we're probably talking about corruption here, and that's probably what these monies are.
But at this point, they'd still be a customer.
Well, you could also, MLRO, to consider whether they want to terminate the relationship. That's the other issue as well. Should you do that? Then you get into issues of consent and all that sort of stuff. So it's because of course the other thing you've got to advise the MLRO to do is maybe to decline to transfer any more funds, because if actually what's happening is that the monies are being transferred as part of a money laundering scheme, the MLRO probably won't want to do that with it unless they get consent from the FIS. So you mention that and say report it to the FIS, ask if they'll give you consent to carry on making the transfers, and if they won't, then obviously you won't do any more on the account. Okay, the next one. So let's read through that. Yeah. We'll wait for you, it's all right. Okay, does somebody want to tackle 4.3?
Well, I would suggest that the most that they can do is send a holding reply back to the firm of solicitors, because of tipping off risks. You certainly couldn't put in a letter. I mean, I think it was a problem for the ABC Bank to say that the account was closed for the reasons of strategic alignment of their global business. So you wouldn't want them to put that into a letter, I don't think. You have no obligation to lie, in other words,
Yeah, I mean, I think,
to try to protect yourself from tipping off. So you just say, no, we'll get back to you.
Yeah.
Of course. That's the best you can probably do.
yeah, I think the thing to bear in mind here is, like I say, keep it simple. So you have to explain at the start that there is a risk of tipping off and it's an offence. Just like the basic stuff there. So that if the FIS has said no consent is given, so what the significance of that legally is that they are not protected against money laundering, got no defence to money laundering if they go ahead with that and subsequently get prosecuted. Let's bring that out. So that's what I think. What this is, there are 4 marks here, so they're clearly looking for a bit more than just saying be careful what you say, although that is actually the opposite you said, the answer really. But I think you just put the framework in context. You need to explain that if the FIS has consented, they'd have a defence to money laundering. They don't have that. Therefore, if they do anything with those funds, they're committing, they're potentially exposing themselves to money laundering offence. That's the first point. Then, if they then do nothing, as they decided to do, not transfer the money, but they say anything to the client that alerts the client to the fact that a report's been made, that's a tipping off offence. So you've got to make sure they don't do that. So just spell that out. And then say, you know, then you could just say, advise the client the MLP very carefully, and it might be worth just checking with the FIS what they're happy for you to say, things like that. And so there's no real right answer here. It's really just to show that you understand what the parameters are, what sort of thing, what area we're in here, which is consent and tipping off.
Would you go over? Could you make a request for consent for the whole of the balance of funds, because they didn't consent to any onward transfer, but at that point you didn't know that he was going to transfer the people. So could you not reapply for consent?
Yeah, you go back to the FIS, what's happened, and say, you know, do you consent to us doing that? But basically, this question, I mean, if you look at the question as a whole, actually, it's quite well structured, because what it's doing is trying to go through all the stages of the AML framework. So the CDD bit at the start, the Brenta bit, well, it's not really technical criminal paper, but they put that in there. Then you've got the issue of suspicion, reporting suspicion. Then you've got the issue of consent and tipping off. And then we're going to get in a moment into the enforcement side of things. So they've clearly structured the question to go through those various stages. So you just make sure that your answer shows that you know all those various different stages. So that, again, we're looking at the 4 marks there. So you can talk about say consent and the consequences of consent and tipping off. Okay, so let's look at the next one. So another 4 marks, 4.4. Have a look at that. We'll talk about that. Okay, who wants to have a go at 4.4? Anybody?
I suppose some of them are aimed at international corporations, money laundering, only being paid to Swiss companies.
Yeah, I said this is basically aimed at the investigative measures open to law enforcement. What tools have they got? So one is mutual legal assistance requests, make a request to the Swiss authorities to get information on the Swiss company, find information on them.
Mm-hmm.
But what else would you look for?
Maybe from being Ireland's assets, whether it be the bank accounts.
But what would you do to get that information?
To get that, so you've already made a suspicious activity report. So would the FIS not then be involved with that?
Yeah, what would happen then is that you need to get information to support the investigations. You could probably apply for a production order against the bank, and then that would require you to give all the information they had about his dealings, all the CDD, everything they held on him. So given that, you'd apply for a production order against the bank. You might want to get a production order again against the estate agent who sold him his house. They might have information as well. You never know from their own CDD process on the source of the money or whatever, who knows. But you basically want to investigate anything you can about where he's got his assets from. So you look at what parties would have information about that, and you can send a production order to anybody who's got, who thinks got the information. So locally, so production order, I would say the bank are the obvious people. That's what they'll do. They'll serve on an ABC private bank, but they might want to serve on, like I said, on the whichever estate agent handled his property purchase. Yeah, you might want to. I mean, they'd less like to have information because they don't do the CDD stuff. But you know.
You say these production orders outside.
No, that's what you use the MLA process for. So that you would basically ask the Swiss authorities. You send a letter of request to Swiss authorities asking them. Well, there are two ways of doing it. You've already got intelligence reports, which suggests that's probably come through. If it's an intelligence report, that's probably come through to the FIS from FIU to FIU, and you then want the evidence to support that intelligence. You can make a formal letter of request to the Swiss authorities, asking for information, asking them to serve whatever orders they have under their legal framework that allow them to go and get information, whatever the equivalent of production order would be in Switzerland. I don't know what that would be, but the point is we can't serve our orders overseas. We have to ask the country in question to use whatever mechanisms they have to go and get information. So you send a letter of request to Swiss authorities saying, can you get us information to do with that Swiss company and any bank accounts in Switzerland that might be linked to that company, to get the information about where the money's come from to the Guernsey entity, the Guernsey individual rather, sorry. So that's what you would do. And also, whether the company is linked with Yelena Karloff, and that you as much information you can.
You put that in your letter.
Yeah, you put that together. You'd ask them for any information they've got on the source of money, the links of the company, and money sent through to the stuff. So that's the two. But you're only going to get 4 marks here. So you'd need to say you didn't mention letter of request for information about the Swiss company that links to Karloff's wife and also Ozan, and then production orders served domestically on the bank and on possibly the estate agent. You could also possibly serve a fraud investigation notice as well, because you remember we spoke about those last time. You don't need a court order for those. If you think this could involve serious or complex fraud, and frankly it looks like it probably does, given what we know before, you wouldn't even need a production order to serve a fraud investigation notice. So I've mentioned those things, that's your 4 marks basically. I would say in all these questions, it's important. I mean, you were talking, when you started speaking, you were talking in a general way, and what you were saying was correct, but you need to bring out the legal, every time they're looking for the actual legal provisions, not the actual sections, but the legal process. They're setting what they want information for the bank. You need to say they have to serve a production order. So you need to just nail it down in that way. That's what they're looking for those marks. Yeah. Yeah. Well, you need to get the evidence in evidential form. You need a production order, really, and we say them all the time. It happens all the time. So that's that one. The next one, simple one. What do you anticipate the authorities will do to stop him disposing of this house and other assets, and how will this be achieved? So again, who wants to have a go at that one? Yeah. There'll be a restraint order because this is a criminal investigation. So it's the process of crime law we're talking about here. And the language used in the process of crime law for conviction-based asset recovery is restraint orders and confiscation orders. So you basically put a restraint order in place on his assets, a charging order on his house, and he can't do anything with it. You said freezing order, they probably won't fail you because it's the same thing, but essentially, just to remember the terminology, if it's civil forfeiture, it will talk about freezing and forfeiture. If it's criminal forfeiture, like it is here, we'll talk about restraint and confiscation. So it'd be a restraint order here, or a charging order if it's on real property. So you basically want a charge order on his house, you'd want a restraint order on his bank accounts, you probably want a restraint order on his car and his RIB as well. And that's your 4 marks. Okay, let's look at the last one, reach the last paragraph. Okay, so who wants to talk about that one? What do you think this question is looking at?
Isn't basically, it's not just the amount that you have to receive, it's the amount benefited from?
Yeah, it's, yeah.
My broad thinking was, yes, you can do it, you can improve it, benefit, but you can test it,
Okay, well, yeah, basically, this is you've got 6 marks here. What they're looking for here, I would say, is to see if you understand the process. There's a 2-stage test, which is determining the extent to which someone's benefited from their crimes, and then the confiscation figure itself. So I've set it out in the study guide, but essentially, the court is required to make certain assumptions, which is assume that anything the person's had in the last 6 years is the proceeds of crime. So you need to mention that you know that. So, well, the 6-year test, sorry, it's a bit complicated, but if it's the 6-year period applies to legitimately held assets. If you can show that definitely the assets themselves actually are the proceeds of crime, there's no time limit. So here, probably, you wouldn't even need the 6-year time limit, because probably this money is directly linked to the criminality itself. So in other words, if someone's convicted of prosecuted in court, all their assets are deemed, anything they had in the last 6 years is deemed to be the proceeds of crime, unless I can show it's got a lawful origin. Essentially, yes, because there are required assumptions, which is any property held by a defendant. I set it out on the study guide if you look at it, page 15. But this is basically, essentially, what it means is that anything you've held in the last 6 years is deemed to be the proceeds of crime. And if actually specific property can be shown to have a direct criminal link, the 6-year period doesn't apply. So what it means is the effect that is anything you've got will be subject to confiscation, to be deemed to be proceeds of crime unless you can show a lawful origin for it. So he's got to show that he acquired that money for lawful purposes. That's the first thing. And then, having made that, so it doesn't matter where he's saying I didn't receive that. I've only benefited from, I've only received £100,000 directly. That's not the test. The test is everything's assumed to be for the last 6 years is your proceeds of crime. So that's the first point to bring out, that you understand that, and the court is required to assume that, and it's up to you to demonstrate the lawful origin. So all that property's got, if you could show it came from a lawful source, then fine. But so that's the first point. And then the next point would be the court then determines, so that's the first question. So can they obtain an order for full 15 million, and on what basis? Well, in theory, yes, because in theory they can demonstrate, unless you can show lawful origin for those funds, the court would assume that it's a process of crime. But can they get an order? Can they actually get a confiscation order for the full amount? That's a different question, because it's a 2-stage test. The first question is to what extent has the person benefited from their crime, and then the next stage is how much of that can be recovered. What's called the realisable amount, and that's the amount that goes in the confiscation order. And under the proceeds of crime law, it says the amount that can be recovered is the benefit figure unless this is higher than the amount that can be realised. And what that means is what can be realised is what money he actually has. So if you can say for the last 6 years you've had billions of pounds going through your hands, but all you've actually got, we've looked into your assets, all you currently hold is a house worth £100,000 and 50 quid in the bank. Those assets, so that will be the confiscation, will be in that amount, the amount that you've got. So even though you've had historically more than that, that can't be recovered from you because you haven't got it. So it won't be caught in that way. So just bear in mind, it's a 2-stage test. First you look at the benefit, which is going to be a high figure, but then you look at what can actually be recovered. So the benefit figure here will always certainly be the full amount, unless he can show he's got a legitimate source, but it's unlikely given his income. We know from the previous text and the previous part of the question, he's on a low salary. He's got all his assets. No one knows where it's come from. So probably he will not be able to satisfy the court that it's not the process of crime. Sorry, that he hasn't benefited from his criminal conduct. So probably the court will make an order saying that the benefit figure is £5 million, stage 1. And then they will say, but what is the amount that can be recovered? And that will involve an examination of his actual assets he currently holds.
I think there's a direction in prison it might be too big, but actually take everything.
Yes, everything, yeah.
Which we're going for.
Yeah.
Awesome.
That's right, yes, it was, what's his name? Dawson Ball, was it?
Was it him?
Oh, sentencing next week for that.
So there was a different one.
Oh, a different one.
Sentencing.
Yeah, I'm sure.
So here we're getting on £5.2 million probably very clear, presumably. I know the second stage of test.
They'll take the house, yeah. Unless it's subject to a charging order, but it's not when it's free and clear, so yeah.
But actually, it's quite logical test.
It is.
Yes, you might have the benefit of all these millions, but you've got a £350,000 house, that's all we've got, that's all we can recover.
All we can cover, yeah, that's right. But also bear in mind as well, though, that the realisable property it also includes property in third-party hands. So the amount that can be recovered is not just the property that he's got, but if he's, for example, transferred it to his brother, for no inadequate consideration in the last 6 years. That's also included in the second part, the second tier test, the second limb of the test. So when you're looking at the amount that can be recovered, the realisable property, it's property he holds, but it's also property that he has held in the last 6 years and made as a gift to somebody else. And a gift includes transferring money for inadequate consideration. I mean, you step back, you can see what it's aimed at. It's all just trying to stop people taking measures to put their assets beyond the reach of the law, basically. So if I had benefited and I've been given all this money and put it in my son's name, and there's no consideration for that, then they'll claw it back from him. So it can apply to property in third-party hands.
Trustees of trust.
Oh well, that's a complicated question. I don't want to get into that level here. That's a very difficult.
What your question on? If you go to the trust.
And there are different views about that because it depends on the trust. If it's put into a discretionary trust, in which Mr. Bad Guy is one of the possible beneficiaries of the trust, but not necessarily, he doesn't actually have a defined interest in those assets, but he does have he doesn't have a proprietary interest in those assets. Obviously, it's the discretion of the trustees. But he does have an interest in it because he has an interest in the proper administration of the trust as a potential object of the trustee's discretion. And there's a whole range of thinking around that as to whether that brings you within those assets within the scope of the process of crime law. But I don't want to get into that here because that's not going to be asked about that. That's just too complicated. But there are Jersey cases ruling on this, the Tantella case and stuff, and there's been discussion here about it. So, but it's an interesting issue if you like that sort of thing, but it's not for these purposes. I wouldn't get stuck into that because just keep in your head the process, the two-stage test, the benefit figure, what the court looks at, which is the required assumptions, and that assuming everything you've had in the last 6 years is the process of crime, and everything before that can be shown directly linked to crime is included. And then, so they come up with the benefit figure, and then you look at the amount that can be recovered, and you look at the amount the defendant holds, or the property held in third-party hands, which he has made a gift of in the last 6 years.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, certainly.
So we defenders have we have assets of 3 million, we have assets which we exchange as lawful, but we also gave away an amount to a third party consideration. Would we go to the defendant for the full amount of the majority of his proceeds is lawful and he doesn't have $1 million of proceeds of crime? Would we go against him for the full amount anyway, or would we look to the third party in that situation, notwithstanding that the defendant has the full amount available to him?
That's a good question. The law doesn't really prescribe that. I think that would probably be a question of the practicalities of the case at the time. If, for example, he had all the money in a easily liquidated form, it's in a bank account or whatever, and if you take that money, you go for that. If the other assets held by somebody else, well, let's say, I don't know, a racehorse, that's more difficult to deal with or whatever, you might not look at that. Similarly, if all his assets were in the form of, I don't know, vehicles, so you'd have to sell on to get the money or whatever, it's complicated, but he'd given also £1 million in cash to his brother as a bank account, you'd probably go after that. So it would just depend on the circumstance. The law doesn't specify on the other. It just says, this is what counts as, there are two sections that just defines realisable property in 2 ways. There are 2 limbs to it, so it doesn't say you've got to go for one rather than the other. It would just be a question, I think, of the practicalities at the time. Yeah, and then on the issue of cases, authorities, I'm not sure what that's getting at actually. There was a case of I think it's called All Press. I thought I covered it actually, but I haven't. So I'll send you an email about that because I thought I'd referred to it in my notes, and I can see that I haven't. Which is a case about it's in there somewhere else. But there is some jurisprudence on this which I can see I should have covered, which is to do with the All Press case about monies that go through somebody's hands but they never actually keep for themselves. It's sort of relevant here, but not quite, because there was a case in which a UK case in which the court had initially at first instance had ruled that even though the person no longer had the money, they were subject to a full confiscation order because in theory they had control of it at a certain time. Forget the details. That was subsequently overruled, and the position seems to be quite clear. You don't actually have the money, then the order cannot be for the full amount. But I'll dig that out and I'll send you an email, because I should have put it in the guide. I thought I had, but I clearly haven't. So.
And that's the UK case, not Guernsey case.
Yeah, although those cases have been applied, because the cases often applied in the Guernsey courts. I thought I'll just double check. It's got my notes somewhere when I'm after the session, but I thought I had covered it. But I certainly intended to. Anyway, I'll send you a link about that. A note about that. So those are the 6 marks. So basically, what we're looking for the 6 marks to show you understand the test: benefit figure, required assumptions, and then the amount that may be realised, which is his assets or assets in third-party hands. So that's essentially what they're looking for. And could it be contested? Then yes, obviously he can show. It's up to him to show that the monies came from a lawful source. Or show that the gift, that the money in third parties was actually a legitimate gift, and he gave consideration for it. Okay, so any questions on that? I think it's quite a nice question. As I say, it's quite logical. It goes through all the logical stages, so it's quite and there are each broken down quite. The number of marks fits quite nicely with the sort of legal provision you have to mention. So it's quite a good question. Okay, let's look at now this page here. The page beginning Holly. Forget that. That's just the front page. Turn over that one. It says question 2 on the next page. Your advice, or ABC Trustees Limited, assuming they're related to ABC Bank. So I read through that. That's 25 mark question. Just been quite a chunky one. So have a careful read of that, and we'll talk through. Oh, actually, it's a discretionary trust. So perhaps it is that point you just mentioned. Perhaps the question is about that, actually. Okay. It could be. We'll see. We'll get through. I know what this case is actually. This has actually had a real case in mind. I know I recognise this one. I know exactly what case this is. Okay, have everyone read it? Let's look at the first question then. So what immediate action would you advise the directors of ABC to take?
How does that line previous questions tell us to report to the AML, report to the FIS? and
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I would also advise them not to make any payments out of the trust assets until they get the consent, without the consent of the FIS. So that's probably the 3 marks there for that. And then, what form and under what legislation might the formal request or demand for information by the local investigators take? Any ideas? No? Okay, well, so the production order is the obvious one.
Yeah.
They go for production order against the bank, against the trustees, possibly a fraud investigation notice, because in fact we know that the if you look at the offence he's wanted for in Venezuela as fraud, includes fraud, so you could, that's clearly going to be within the purview of fraud investigation notice, so you could have a fraud investigation notice or a production order. That's probably what it's going to be. So we're talking about the process of crime law for the production order and the fraud investigation law for the fraud investigation notice.
Fraud investigation.
Sorry?
Fraud investigation notices.
It's under the fraud investigation law. It's in, it's in the study guide, but
Okay.
yeah.
So that's 4 points. Anything else to say?
I'm not sure what they've got in mind for that.
It seems like
I agree. I was wondering that myself. It does seem like. Yeah, I can't think what it would be. I'm not really think what that would be. I mean,
you just can't really 3 marks.
if it was a bank, you could get a customer information order, but this is a trust company, so I'm not sure that would apply. Double check. I have to check. I can't remember offhand. I'm pretty sure that customer information orders, in fact, they do apply to FSBs, all FSBs. That might be the third one actually, possibly. Sorry, I just can't now remember offhand whether, I know that an account monitoring order only applies to bank accounts, but I can't. Customer information order I think might be available actually, so that'll be the third one, which is an order under the process of crime law. I'll just double check my notes actually, so I'll try to refer to it in here. Investigatory powers. Yeah, it's customer information too, yeah. That's the third one. They require financial services businesses to provide specified information on the assets and identity of particular customers, and trust companies are financial services businesses under the legislation, so it's hard to get there. That's under the process of crime law. So can it be opposed, and how would that be done, at what stage? What arguments might be raised? So what do you think about that?
Well, the fraud investigation notice, you don't need a court order, do you? So that can't be opposed.
Ah, well, that you can challenge. You can take a JR over the decision to issue the notice. If you're doing the I don't know whether it comes up, I can't remember if it comes from the civil paper or in the bailiff's paper, but the case of Bassington, which is the fundamental case of actually, that was a review of fraud investigation notice. That's your remedy. So if you're saying that it was unreasonable of the attorney or the procurator to issue the notice, you would JR it. So that's clear what that's looking for there, I would say. And you can go back and ask in terms of the production order or a customer information order, you can go back to the court and ask the court to set it aside. But I think this is probably aimed at the JR point for Bassington, because that's kind of more interesting one in a way. Yeah. And then would you advise there should be opposition? Well, the only opposition, the other point you can make is if it's a fraud investigation notice, is that there is also the privilege against self-incrimination. So if you were one of the directors, if the notice is served on you as a director of the trust company and you've got to go and answer questions, if there were a possibility of self-incrimination, you could raise that. It seems unlikely in this case, but that's the only one I can think of really that reason why you'd want to oppose it. Otherwise, you wouldn't normally seek to oppose these orders. If you're not involved somehow in the criminality yourself, why would you do that? And then the next one, to what extent might any material obtained on behalf of the US be used in local prosecution?
To say that it can, if it's to do with criminal or proceeds of crime offences.
Yeah, I think this is to do with. I think this question is aimed at getting the agreement of the US authorities that you want to use it for domestic purposes, because you've gone and got the information to support their investigation. And so, if you're going to use it yourself for local prosecution, there is an issue whether or not you can legitimately do that. There's no clear answer to that, I would say, but I would just say you need to make sure that the US authorities are happy for you to do that, because it might prejudice their own investigation. And you might need the consent. I mean, there's an issue around whether the legal gateways under which you got it would enable you to use it locally. There's an issue around that. Again, that's quite a technical issue. And there is, of course, the issue of self-incrimination again, because if your client has given answers in the course of replying to a fraud investigation notice, you can't use that against the client if it breaches the privilege against self-incrimination. So that's in fact thinking about, that's probably what this is really aimed at, because if you give answers in support of the investigation to Petrov, but actually you were incriminated, that can't be used against you. And there's forget the name of the legislation, but there is provision in Guernsey law about. In fact, I'll send you a link about that when I look up the cases. So I can't remember what it's called, but the legislation is called. But I know there's definitely I think it's statements on compulsion law, something like that. It's called. But there is legislation which says that you can't be. It can't be used against you. So I think that's probably what that question's aimed at. Let's make a note. Figure it out and send you an email. I'll send you an email to you. I've got your email, haven't I, Gemma? So I'll link that to you, and then you can pass it on. Sorry, I might get a pencil. I'm going to kind of borrow a pencil from somebody. Oh, I've got one. It's all right. I've got 1 second. Make a note. So I think, yeah, what they're looking for there is basically liaise with the US authorities and self-incrimination. Okay, and then the next bit. So in addition to seeking the material, the GBA now want to restrain gold deposits in Guernsey on the back of the letter of request and as part of their own investigations. How would they do that? Can it be opposed, and so at what stage? So what's the answer to that one, do we think?
Will this be issuing a restraining order?
A restraint order, basically, yeah. And again, the same question, can it be opposed, and so at what stage? You've got a right to come back to court and ask for it to be set aside or varied. So there'll be a return date after the order, and you come back and challenge it if you want to. And then the next one, they seek the restraint of assets outside Guernsey. Can they do so, and if so, how? That's a very specific question, which if you read the notes carefully, you will know the answer to. But I don't expect it will be the forefront of your minds otherwise. Anyone have a crack at that?
They can follow the assets that are out of Guernsey.
Yeah, there are 2 points here. One is the King case, which I mentioned in the notes, in which that case has turned on whether or not a Guernsey, a restraint order of a Guernsey over the assets of a Guernsey trust could have effect outside the jurisdiction, and the court said it couldn't. So the actual Guernsey restraint order will not have effect outside. That's the case of King, and that's referred to in the notes. But as you say, they had then to issue a letter of request to the foreign jurisdiction, and if they know where the assets are, and get them to be restrained there. So yeah, that's the answer to that. Unless they send a letter of request.
Yeah. So with the letter of request, they would be successful. They would be successful with the letter of request. You can't refuse to comply with the letter of request.
Oh, it would depend on the legal framework and the requested country. As I recall in the King case, I think one of the issues was that the location of some of the assets overseas were in a jurisdiction which was not being helpful, and so we wanted to say that the court order here had immediate effect. Then we lost that argument. But normally, yes, the letter of request would be successful if it meets the tests in the requested country's legal framework. They had to apply under their own laws, so that would depend what those laws were.
So just as a preliminary point, you need to order against the trust and travel off to the other country and say that we have personally ordered against the trust and we're going to the assets elsewhere, help us out, or does it's a matter of domestic law in the other country whether.
Yeah, you don't need a restraint order here first. No,
You don't.
No, you just need to. You would for a divorce and confiscation order, that's a bit different. But in terms of restraining assets, you just need to write to the other country, letter of request saying we think. And you have to obviously give your reasons, set it all out, the grounds, and then assuming that it comes within the test of their domestic law, they can then go and restrain the assets. And then the final question. Petrol's about to go to Switzerland. They want to bring GVL to bring him to Guernsey to interview and possibly charge him. How might this be achieved? I think it's a slightly unfair question because I don't think this is really fully on the syllabus, but there we go. Any ideas? Yeah, we have to see. We'd have to ask the Swiss authorities to extradite him to Guernsey. I don't think extradition's on the syllabus, frankly, but but I think that's what they're looking for.
How much further do you need to go with that answer than moving towards current situation order to get everything on?
I think you need to, if you use the same language the whole time, so you say things like, you said, a letter of request asking the authorities in that country to extradite him, ask the authority to extradite him to Guernsey. That would depend whether or not they would do it. Would depend on the extradition law in that country, whether it came within their legal framework. It probably would, but like I said, extradition is not on the syllabus. So I mean, I could talk about. I know quite a lot about extradition. I worked in that area myself, legislation for here, but that's not really on the syllabus. So I don't really propose to go through detail about it. But that's, yeah, I think. Well, I'm not. Yeah, I'm not really sure because I think it shouldn't. It seems a slightly unfair question to me. But if you just said you'd send a letter of request, I think as long as you keep repeating the nuts and bolts of the process, talk about production rules, talk about this, talk about the actual language they use in legislation. That's what they're looking for. So you send a letter of request. You'd request the Swiss authorities to extradite him to Guernsey. Okay, so that's that question. Any other questions on that? We turn over, then question 4. The next page is question 3. Ignore that. That's about some sap and salt being charged with offences against a person. But question 4 is on page 8, which is another case has a money laundering aspect to it. Just in the, I think just the first one. Oh no. Yeah, the first part. So question 4.4.1. So you have to learn while you read that.
The positive is that the same things seem to be coming up year after year after year. So, what those to memory, know a little bit, I guess.
There's a case of this guy let's try and leave Guernsey with 100k. He won with the card game.
Oh yeah. The dog sniffed him out.
Wanted to work with the plastic money.
That's on my mind. Yeah.
I think.
Telling to flee with a few million.
No, but it's more secure, but surely it doesn't hold the same kind of plastic.
Yeah.
I don't know if you scratch the Canadian money, it's not maple syrup. Make it zoos.
Could be. Is it?
That's legitimate, that's not being funny.
There's sort of some religious impregnated.
I'm a Canadian at heart.
So what plastic money has got?
But what about all the tourists leaving Canada with maple syrup? Where they're getting small these dogs. A lot of cultural.
There's a lot of border agency questions.
There's a lot of them.
Okay, so perhaps Jeremy in the Royal Court charged with pleading guilty to a drugs offence. So they found actually in addition to the cases prosecuted for, they found 50,000 in cash, which he says is the process of gambling. So How would the prosecution seek to apply to confiscate the money, and what test would the court apply?
They go through the two-stage test of the benefit figure and then the reliable figure.
That's correct, yeah.
Um,
So the court would have to assume that money was the proceeds of crime, because that's the required assumption.
then he'd have to prove, unless there was a lawful origin, so unless he could prove that he won at £50,000.
Playing cards, and let's face it,
It's
that's
not the best,
it's
is
not
it?
looking likely, is it?
But
Get your mates along. So we played cards last night. It's not going to work, is it? I mean, it's
but is that the is that a forfeiture order, or is that
this is confiscation because it's criminal.
oh,
A forfeiture.
that's civil, yeah.
A forfeiture is if there's no criminal conviction, but you think the money is proceeds of crime. No.
He's got convicted of this one possession.
The point is here that a confiscation order can only be made by the royal court, not the magistrate's court. And although he's only been charged with single possession, if he's been sent to the royal court because of his previous convictions, that's the significance of that. And because he's been sent to the royal court will apply the confiscation process under the process of crime law. If it's just in the mag, that wouldn't have happened.
Okay.
That's the significance of the conviction. I mean, it's just some flesh on the bones. It's not really directly relevant to this.
I thought there had to be a previous conviction, or there has to be a conviction to get into this.
Yeah, we've got one here because we do, but he's going to plead guilty. He's yeah, so he's
So
going
I'm
to
saying is the royal court able to do this on the basis of the previous conviction? Now there's a straight pay, well, 2 years ago. So we now we're into this two-stage test.
no. Well, so it gets complicated. If there were reason at the time, if there was an undischarged confiscation order against him from the earlier, which that can happen, you can make a confiscation order, you can't recover everything, and it sits on the file. If you live in the lottery, they'll come take it off you. That's not what this is really aimed at. I wouldn't get into that's too complicated. I wouldn't get into all that because that never comes up in the exams. What this is aimed at is the fact that he is about to go to the royal court and is going to be convicted because we know he's going to plead guilty. So he's about to be convicted in the royal court of a criminal offence, and because of that, that means that the court is required to apply the benefit test. The significance of the previous convictions is purely because that's why he's going to the royal court. If it had been a single offence of possession, you'd been tried in the magistrate's court, and then the confiscation regime would not apply. But because of his previous convictions, he's being sent to the royal court, and that therefore exposes him to the full weight of the confiscation regime.
Were he then to plead not?
If he was acquitted, then yeah, they couldn't do anything.
Obviously, it doesn't ask for what the one who lies and that's what we were saying. Yeah, they can do this guilty.
I think there has to be a conviction. There has to be a live conviction to get a confiscation.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So you'd say.
If he was acquitted, then they don't.
Yeah, but I mean, it depends on the strength of the evidence against him. If the evidence against him is very powerful, and he's having plead guilty, got him back to rights, there's really no point in saying, well, I think you should contest it, because actually, if you go down the confiscation order, he's going to anyway, we're in a much worse position fighting on a case like that and losing than if he just pleads guilty, get no credit for plea. Yeah. So it depends on the strength of the evidence. But really,
I'm just trying to think of ways to get to this.
Yeah, no, indeed, yeah. Well, one point you could make, I suppose, which isn't really what the question's focused on, but it is relevant in a way, is that in the UK, in order to have a confiscation regime in this way, the required assumptions, you've got to show the defendant had a criminal lifestyle. So you've got to show a pattern of offending. We don't have that in Guernsey. In our framework, any conviction exposes you to that. So you could mention that. You could say that the convictions, the previous offences suggest a criminal lifestyle, but in fact that's not relevant, that's not needed for our case. But I don't really think that's what they're after. I think all they want you to say is that because he's going to be in the royal court, he'll be exposed to the confiscation regime, and that has the test of benefit figure. He'll have to demonstrate that the assets actually come from a lawful source. He'll find that very hard to do, given that it was in a hiding place, it was hidden in his flat, and the story's not very credible about playing cards. So probably the court will probably assume that they will probably not be satisfied that 50,000 came from a lawful source. The question then will be the confiscation itself. will the confiscation order, the amount that can be recovered, will that include the 50,000? And clearly it will, because he's got that money. So it's not like it's passed through his hands, he's lost it. So all they're looking for you to do here is basically explain how the test works. I wouldn't get.
And then it's in the application of the test that we can get that 50 mark.
It's what, sorry? It's
in the application of the test, and saying, you know, the realisable figure in this case is that there's £50,000 of cash.
yeah, so yeah.
It is eligible to be.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I said, I think the only reason the convictions are mentioned just explain why he's going up to Royal Court on the basis of one fairly minor offence. And it's because of his previous convictions. Yeah.
I haven't seen one in court. I haven't seen a confiscation order. They are.
No, I don't have either. So, but yeah, it's quite a draconian process. Like I say, we don't have in the UK. You've got to have a criminal lifestyle. We don't have that. Just go straight in. And,
that's quite a high bar. I think somebody's got a criminal lifestyle, isn't it?
yeah, well, you've got to share a pattern. I forget how it works in the UK. You've got to share a pattern of offending that suggests that, and it's all because they had all these cases of, you know, Mr. Biggs being seen to be on the reach of the law, and they'd had criminal offences in the past, but they couldn't touch their assets, and then they tried to get around that. But the way it worked, because of this drug trafficking separate regime thing, in the UK, the drug trafficking law didn't have the lifestyle test, and the process of crime law did. Because we modelled ours on the drug trafficking law, our process of crime does have it, so it's going to have everything. It's have it automatically. Much less difficult for us. Okay, I think that's the only one left on that paper that's relevant. Yeah. Okay, and then the last one. Oh, the other thing, of course, to mention with that, just to bear in mind as well, there's maybe the extra mark comes in is, of course, that's under the drug trafficking law, not under the process of crime law, because it's a drugs case. So that's probably an extra mark will come there as well. Exactly the same regime, identical regime, but it's just under the drug trafficking law, not under the process of crime law. So if we look at the next page, question 2, Daniel, back in the world of drugs. We'll have a read through that. Okay, if you look at question A, that's a very simple thing. I mean, that's not really AML related as such. I mean, that's more to do with just him getting credit for plea.
Yeah.
He's got credit for assistance. Yeah, it's not really, but that's not AML. So, and forget about B, that's not AML either. Won't bother with that one. C.
You can offer assistance to the officers, and nobody ever finds out they've offered assistance. But then when the judge is sentencing, he will know.
And you'll get credit in his reduced sentence.
That's anything, but I just didn't know how to deal with it in the system.
It's one of the, I think it's one of those things that there's like a sealed file on that person. So if you just pick up the file, you'd never know about it unless they were the sentencing.
Yeah. There's no statutory provisions governing it, it's just what happens.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, then C, we're back in the world of confiscation orders.
Would you say that the benefit would be anything within my 6 years otherwise?
Just, yes, it's two, it's something, yeah. Yeah, he's never worked, so he'll find it hard. The benefit will be that, yes.
The benefit figure is the last 6 years.
Or, no, the last 6 years, or anything that can be shown directly linked to crime. So, benefit figure is anything within 6 years, but if you can show a direct link to a criminal act and those assets, there's no 6 year time period for it.
Oh, okay.
So we're looking at what it's got 20, it's got a £200,000 house, 20,000 a boat, the car 10,000, and the bank account. So we're looking at what's that? That's 220, 30, 80. Just over 300,000, whatever that comes to, £300,000 benefit figure.
But you add the 500 for the kilo of heroin, since that passed through.
That's a good point, actually. Yes, you would include that, yeah.
Include that in the benefit.
The benefit figure, yeah, yeah. Yeah. They're saying based on the information of what they're likely to allege as the benefit figure, it's going to be that, and anything else they might uncover in an investigation. If they discover he's got a bank account with more money or whatever, it might. But it's essentially all those assets. So you're looking for 5 marks here. So basically, it's just again same thing, the outlining of the process for confiscation. So the required assumptions, him demonstrating that they're lawful, and then the benefit figure is likely to be that figure 300,000. Then it says. With what consequences for Daniel? If that figure is greater than the value of the assets, what order could the court make? Well, that's going to be the realisable. Yeah, certainly. Yeah. Well, I added it up.
I think it's 815 because it includes all assets in the last 6 years and the directly linked to criminal. Or does it only include?
Well, he has it. It says he owns it. It's everything he owns at the time. He owns it. Yeah, it's everything. All of these had in the last 6 years, or in the case of criminal assets before that time. But this is what he currently owns. So it's got all this stuff that's in that. Yeah.
Does it include the 5K that he was supposed to get? All of it.
So yes, you say just to get your 5 marks, just explain the process basically. The required assumption they're all process of crime, unless you can demonstrate. This never works, so it's highly unlikely to demonstrate lawful origin of any of those assets. And then the court looks at the realisable sum and works out what we've actually got, and then we'll order that.
So he had won a heroin, but he never got the £5,000 reward. That was just theoretical until the heroin reward came.
Yeah, so he hasn't got that in his possession, so that will not be included in the recoverable amount. He hasn't got
Certainly,
it.
yeah.
It's just working out the benefit.
That's good, yeah.
Unlawfully, notwithstanding might have been changed before the 6 years time cut off. That wasn't my thing.
That was me thinking out loud.
And then the final part of the question, apart from seeking the assets or the value as part of the confiscation order on the drug trafficking law, how else might Daniel's boat be taken from him? Yeah, that's right.
There was a case on this, wasn't there?
Yeah,
where a boat was used, but boat wasn't owned by the defendant.
If it's an instrumentality of crime, basically, that's what it comes down to. That this is an instrumentality of crime, so it can be confiscated.
So then it would be under the proceeds of crime law, drug trafficking.
No, actually, as I recall, I think there are particular provisions in the drug trafficking law about instrumentalities, I think, that aren't in the proceeds of crime law. But in any event, if you look at my note, there's also the police property law, which is anything in someone's possession at the time that's used for commission of a criminal offence can be confiscated. So it will be confiscated as an instrumentality of crime. Yeah.
Under the police.
Yeah. But I think that's a recollection. I think there are some other provisions, Vienna Convention provisions in the drug trafficking law as well. But either way, it would be an instrumentality. That's what they're getting at. So you've got 5 marks here. I'd say they'd probably give you 2 marks to explain the benefit figure assessment, 2 marks to recovery, the asset, the recoverable amount figure, and probably 1 mark for the instrumentality. Probably how that will break down, I would say. Okay, and then D, how might the prosecution go about restraining his assets? Certain familiarity with these questions coming through by now. I think it might be, yes. A restraint order or a charging order over his house.
So what does the charging order do? The same thing, just prevents him from selling it?
Yeah, essentially, yeah. It's,
so it doesn't revest it in anybody, it just...
no, I think I can't remember. Just check it out to remind myself. I can't remember. Oh, it gets registered. That's right. On the leave, it gets filed on there. That's right. Leave des hypothèques Act et cours et obligation. It gets filed on that.
It gets filed.
Yeah. If that's in Guernsey, if it's in Albany, it's filed at the land registry, and if it's in Sark, it's by the Court of Seneschal, but the questions are normally Guernsey based. You've got 6 marks though, it's quite a lot for that question.
Yeah, how much for our restraint order? The other one was only 4 restraint orders, so they're looking for a bit further, I suppose.
I don't know. I think it's sort of random in a way. I mean, people just allocate some marks. One can try and read too much into it. I mean, just talk about it's a restraint order or a charging order to explain that. That's all there is to say under the drug trafficking law. Okay, then E, the prosecution get a confiscation order and want to enforce it against his UK assets. How do they do that? Oh, so that's the thing, sorry, going back to the previous question, of course, is he may have assets outside the jurisdiction which I want to restrain. So in that case, I'd need to send a letter of request. So that's another thing to throw in for your 6 marks, because his domestic assets be restrained by a restraint order or a charging order, but that won't apply overseas. So you need to apply, if you had intelligence, if you had information, so you had assets in other country, you send a letter of request to that country to restrain those assets. We know he's got assets, in fact, in the UK. So how do they enforce the confiscation order against those assets?
Letter of request.
Yeah. Basically, you send two. You send one at the sort of restraint stage, and then once you've got the confiscation order, you send a letter of request asking the UK to enforce the confiscation order. And then the final one, I want to prosecute Cyril. I forget who Cyril was, actually. The person who...
Cyril's the guy who gives up the information.
Cyril's the guy who forced him to bring the drugs to Guernsey, that's right. Yeah, so okay, so how would you... the lawyers want to prosecute him. If he lives in England, how would we do this? Well, I think they'd have to argue that it was some sort of conspiracy. And then if you can show that part of the conspiracy took place in the jurisdiction, which it clearly did, you've got jurisdiction over it. So I don't think they're getting at that, I think, because there's only 2 marks. I think what they're getting at here is the difference in getting someone back from the UK and getting someone back from Spain. That's what this is aimed at. And again, it's just slightly unfair, because I don't think they're not really, this extradition type thing is not really on the syllabus. But this assumes you know the process for getting people back from the UK, and I don't imagine you would do that, because I don't think it's on. But essentially, there's a statute called the Indictable Offences Act, which is also UK Act of Parliament. But under that Act, warrants, arrest warrants, are issued in Guernsey, Jersey, anywhere in the British Isles, essentially, are enforceable anywhere else in the British Isles. So if a warrant for his arrest is issued in Guernsey, under that Act, the UK authorities would be transmitted to the UK, and they would then give effect to it, and he'd be shipped back here under that arrest warrant. That's what I think. That's what this question's are, which is a bit unfair, like I said, because I don't think that's on the syllabus. You wouldn't know that, but that's what that is. And if he lived in Spain, it would of course be different, because that Act doesn't have any application to Spain, so that'll be an extradition application. But it's only 2 marks, so that all I want you to say is the UK warrant, the Guernsey warrant will be backed in the UK under, the Indictable Offences Act, you remember it, but I think you just said there is legislation that allows Guernsey warrant to be backed in the UK. In Spain, no. Because essentially what it is it was just, this Act goes back to the 19th century, and it's just a way of making sure that within the British Isles we're all seen as one sort of space for criminal arrest purposes. In fact, of course, under the EU framework, the European arrest warrant, there is now the same process for all the EU member states. We're not party to that. That's what they go now post Brexit. But if he lived in Spain, I don't think if we're talking about 2 marks here, I don't think I want you to get into the whole thing about the European arrest warrant, but I do have to say that we would have to get him extradited from Spain. That's how we would do it. So it's 2 marks, just say that. So the basic point is, if it's in the UK, it's simply backing the warrant system. If it's the warrant's given off, if it's elsewhere, it's extradition. Okay, then the next question, question 3. I think that's another AML related one.
I've never done a very one.
Okay, so what do we think about that? Well, let's break it down. So what advice do you give to the director? Let's look first of all at the first paragraph here, the dealings with Mr. Gazin Far from Iran. What advice would you give the director about that?
That he needs to go and see the MLRO.
Yep.
And make because it's suspicious because it's you've got cash, then you've got 2-point-something million pounds of cash being brought into the island, and there's a customs law against that. He's also buying property he hasn't seen.
Yeah, and also he's
it's going through the trust. He's putting the money into the trust.
And the source of funds is bound to be questionable. He works as a furniture retailer. The trust has got 500,000 inheritance. Where has he got that £3 million come from? Where's he got that from? There's all sorts of red flags going off here.
And it's around.
It's around. So you've got a sanctions issue possibly as well.
And that's not very good order.
No, so you need to go through again the same sort of process really. You know, the director needs to do full CDD on this, and but probably it does look inherently suspicious. So almost certainly, as well as doing the CDD steps to go through, you would need to make an STR, a report suspicion, because it does look pretty dodgy. Because he wants the trust to hold the money. He wants to put the balance of the purchase money in cash held by the trust until completion.
Right.
So again, you've got fairly easy marks there. Just run through the CDD process, the reporting of suspicion, the possible sanctions linked with Iran, and in particular, the source of funds issue, because it's very difficult to see where he's got that money from. Selling furniture in Iran, it's hard to believe that will generate £3 million in cash. So that's what you need to go through there. We've been through that before. And then the next paragraph, downturn in work, of course, to look at possibilities. It's going to sack the MLRO and the HR manager and have 2 part-time staff splitting that role and slash its training budget. So what does that tell you? Or what advice do you give in relation to that?
It's really a requirement that every
Full-time.
Yeah, you'll be in breach basically of your obligations in the PB regs. You have to have an MLRO, and you've got to give adequate training as well. That's what they're looking at here. Basically, you've got to have an MLRO full time, and you've got to give training on money laundering issues and ML and TF issues. That's a requirement for the PB regs. So that's what that's aimed at.
Is there any requirement you only have to have one person designated? You don't need an alternate or anything like that?
You have to have a nomination officer. You have to have 2. You have to have somebody who's MLRO, and then a nominated officer who is there, who steps in if the MLRO is away. Under the current, it's still changing under the new regime. It's going to be MLRO, MLCO, as I'm called, and a different title, but it's essentially the same thing. It's MLRO and the backup person.
What about oral
Well, that's a matter.
Is that part of the training?
Yeah, probably. I mean, I suppose you'd have to say there the question of whether they want HR manager or not. It's not a specific requirement of the framework to have one, but if that means that person going, there is nobody overseeing training and making sure it's done properly and whatever, that have a knock-on effect. So that's how it comes in. And there are requirements as well about good governance and stuff in the PB regulations. Or no, so it wouldn't be PB, it would be FSB regs here, because we're not about a trust company, not a law firm. But it's under but it's the exact same framework for financial services businesses. There are requirements of good governance and things as well. So actually, you should be in breach for all that if your firm isn't operating properly. Okay, and then B, this is the same essay type question again. I
This
mean,
one's more specific, isn't it, or is it not?
well, I would say these are all different ways of asking essentially the same question. I wouldn't get too hung up on the actual word. I mean, you could do a facetious answer to this. How do you actually order? Do you do some speech full of jokes and you'd be technically answering the question? You know, I would say I'd make these jokes, but blah blah. But actually, that's not what they want you to do. Is basically explain about the FATO standards, why we have them, what our framework does, and what would happen if we didn't comply. And the effect that would be that we would put on a blacklist by the FATF, and all countries around the world will have to impose enhanced due diligence on any dealings with Guernsey, which would be catastrophic for us as a business centre, as a financial centre. That's what they're asking for, really. And obviously, increasing and burdensome regulation is a difficult issue, but we've got to weigh up that against being able to allowed to be kept open. So that's what that's really about. Okay, and then ignore the next page. That's just Tom to come up with that. But then question 5, it's the last one we're going to look at. So 3 through that. Okay, so it's quite an evolved question. What do we think about that?
The first bit, whether it should provide the fraud or agency officer intelligence seeks, you can obtain a fraud investigation notice, which would require you to do that, so you shouldn't do that without that notice.
Yeah, and there's an issue there about if you just give the intelligence, there's an issue there of your client's confidentiality. So, and lots, I mean, some businesses will do that, but others are very concerned. They want to have it absolutely by the book. So you would have to, well, in fact, you probably get a fraud investigation order notice here. Production order is a court order, so you probably go, if it's fraud. Oh no, hang on, but he's involved in the laundering side rather than the fraud. So that may be what they're trying to point you to here, saying that you might consider, the law officers might consider making issuing a fraud investigation notice, but given that the investigation is more likely on the laundering side than the fraud, so it says here, they might choose to go and get a production order. So I think just show you know that difference. I mean, that's why that language is in there.
And then we'd also just bring confidentiality. But also the
Sorry, there's one point that's case as well. It's not clear from this whether a SAR has been made. If a SAR has been made, then the GBA has the right to go and ask any person for information. You must provide that information. So it could be that. So the confidentiality report wouldn't arise then, because that overrides confidentiality. So if a SAR has been made and this information is required in relation to that SAR, then under the disclosure law regulations, the bank would have to provide it. But if a SAR hasn't been made, they've got no legal obligation to provide the intelligence, and they might choose, but might prefer not to because of confidentiality reasons. Just bear that in mind. That's a key difference. But if they don't provide the intelligence, then how to be attained would be through a fraud investigation notice or a production order, and more likely, or a customer information order. And if it's fraud, then they're more likely to be a fraud investigation notice. But given that this is money laundering, not fraud, there might be issues about that. So the law officers might choose to get a production order or customer information order instead. So it's just showing you know all this stuff, really. I mean, you don't need to decide what in fact would happen. It's just showing you know these are the parameters, and that's what we're interested in.
Also, the consent comes from the FIS, not the GBA. So I don't.
Oh yeah, that's confusing. The FIS sits within the GBA. I think that's just a sloppily worded bit of the question, because the FIS is within the GBA. And if you look at the process of the crime law, it actually defines where it gives the defence to money laundering and so on. You get consent. It says a consent of a police officer, and that's defined in the process of crime law as including a customs officer. And so if you get consent from anybody, the GBA or the police, that gives you the defence of money laundering. So don't get too hung up on that. I mean, that's a valid point you raised, but in fact it's not. It wouldn't actually make a difference legally.
And then also I guess we have to go over the tipping off.
Yeah, that's right.
It's an offence, and don't do it, and you have a right not to lie in your letter, so you can just say that it'll be closed.
And then this point here, whether the GBA can in effect refuse consent to close the account. So what do you think that's aimed at?
I think it can. And I would say that was aimed at not giving back any money, as still here and able to get out. Yeah,
but I think what the question's trying to point you towards is the Garnett case. The Garnett case about the reasonableness of the GBA's refusal to grant consent. I think that's what this is aimed at. So can the GBA refuse to consent? Of course, it's a matter of practicality, it can, but legally, you could then challenge that decision. That has happened in Garnett, and the Court of Appeal said in Garnett that essentially, as long as there's a reasonable basis for suspicion, the GBA can do that. But what they're saying here is, they're saying they will refuse consent if the bank doesn't do what they're asking to do. So you could argue possibly that would be an unreasonable action on their part, and therefore they couldn't lawfully do that. So I think that's what that question is asking you to consider, at least, whether or not the actions of the GBA are reasonable. You look at the Garnett test, and again, it's all in the notes, case of Garnett, but I think that's what that's getting at. I think it may be also worth, if you get a question on consent in this way, probably worth bringing out that you understand the limits of consent, because people often talk about the consent regime. I do it myself all the time, but there's no actual framework saying that you must require the consent of the GBA. Consent only applies as a defence to money laundering. So people apply for consent because they want that defence, but there's no actual obligation to get consent for anything. But people often talk as if there is, and they say, where do I find that regime? Well, it doesn't exist. So there's confusion. There's obligation to report suspicion, and on the back of that, if you get consent, having made a report, you've got a defence to money laundering. But there's no, if they decide they want to close those accounts, they can do that without the consent of the GBA. That's not of itself criminal. But what would happen is, if they're then prosecuted for money laundering in closing those accounts and paying away, they would not have the defence of consent. So that's an important point to bear in mind, because that's often misunderstood by people. And in fact, it's become such an issue in the UK, because they've got the same regime. They now issue guidance, which they call it, they refer to, they don't even use the term consent anymore. They say DAML, Defence Against Money Laundering. And they'll say, if the NCA, who's their equivalent FIS, if they issue a DAML, they don't even talk about consent anymore, because it's confused people so much. We're thinking, I can't do it without the consent of the GBA. Yes, you can. Legally, it's not stopping you doing it. You should run for defence if you're then prosecuted for money laundering, which is a different thing. So that, like I said, that's often confuses people. Sorry?
In practice, you would get that consent.
Yeah, the reality is that no one's going to do it without the consent, but there's nothing legally to stop them doing it. But that's a subtlety that, in practical terms, doesn't make much difference. But legally, it is a difference, and it's not always appreciated or understood in that way. So but I think that's what that point is aimed at. Can the GBA in fact refuse consent? It's also can refuse consent, whether that's lawful or not. You could challenge that decision to Garnett. That doesn't stop you. That doesn't stop you doing what you want to do, but then you will bear the consequences if you're subsequently prosecuted. Okay, and then the last one to look at is Emil and his money laundering prosecution. Then it's all to do with a check. Have a quick read through that and then see what you think.
A big question.
It is, yeah. Okay, so what do you think is the answer to this one? Looking at 10, a lot of marks actually. You say 10 marks for this. That's what I'm starting to see how you get there, really. But
Then needing to get the restraining order at the accounts.
yeah, they seek to get a variation, go back to court and get a sort of variation to permit that money to be. That's the first thing you would do. Yeah, yeah. To get an order allowing the bank to make that payment to them.
Is there any procedures that should be followed? Yeah, I've never seen a restraining order.
No, I think basically you can make an application supported by an affidavit.
Okay.
I mean, basic, yeah, that's, I think that's all that, I mean, I was trying to think how you get 10 marks out of that.
I think they're all record.
Yeah, I think so, yeah, yeah.
I think we're going to, yeah. Then maybe you could say that the bailiff could say
Okay.
a criminal paper at the end of the day, isn't it? So
Yes, yeah.
I think it's a tie of AML criminal.
And then if they're unsuccessful, will they be able to recover the debt at all if he obtains a confiscation order? If the Crown obtains a confiscation order? To be the law officers, actually, it's not the Crown at all, but anyway, leave that aside.
Does a genuinely incurred debt come into the realisable amount?
Yeah, that is, yes.
Owed to somebody.
Yeah, if it's basically, the realisable property does not include obligations of priority, and that is basically pre-existing obligations to pay fines or debts of the kind listed as preferred debts, Guernsey law. It's in the note, I put in my note. So that's what you'd look at, and it probably would come within that. The realisable amount probably wouldn't cover that extent of the money because that's subject to its pre-existing liability. But I can't see how you get 10 marks for that question really myself. That's quite strange. Unless it's asking about the SASI process, maybe. Have you covered that? Are you doing
Well, that's what I
SASI?
thought, but SASI's not on our syllabus.
No. But I wonder if that's what it's aimed at.
Yeah. That's what I was thinking,
Well, it is, yeah.
take on the debt, but
I don't know, but it says it's in more because that's not on the syllabus. So.
yeah. I mean, we all already know about SASI's, we've been worried, but is that what they're asking?
Yeah.
What's that? I haven't watched one in court last week. I think SASI is on the property paper.
Right, okay. Or not on the civil paper either, then it could be on the civil, I guess, as well.
Is it?
Okay, well, I assume that's what they're looking for here. I don't know if they have any procedures with perhaps in the SASI process, but in terms of the procedure to get the account varied, that the order varied, the restraining order varied, that would be the normal criminal procedure. Go back with an affidavit to be hearing in chambers with an affidavit. I think that's what you can say really from a criminal perspective.
Yeah.
Just like the SASI simplified rules.
Sorry, say again?
It's heard in camera, is that what you?
Yeah, yeah. It's heard in camera to be an application supported by affidavit served on the law officers in advance, good John represent that sort of thing. Talk about that sort of basic kind of things. I think either it's talking about that or it's talking about SASI. I don't know, but it seems odd it's talking about SASI in this paper. But
Yeah.
This is the bar exam after all. So. Okay, I think we've covered pretty much all the areas that are likely to come up. So you'll see there are certain themes, as in the ethics paper, certain themes, investigatory powers, the process for confiscation, restraint and confiscation, that's really, and the MLA process, that's what we're talking about here. So look out for those things, make sure you're on top of the broad brush of what those things do. Use the language all the time with letter of request. So just so you know, if you're talking generally about applying for help, use the correct that language so they can see you know what you're talking about. But, has anyone got any questions on the reason today?
So on 3 hour exam, what is this? Should we take up after?
Criminal paper.
Yeah. It's hard, I extracted these, so you can't see the overall
You
scope.
can
of
see
it.
the overall scope.
Yeah, but you can go online. They're on the GTA website.
right.
Just have a look at some papers and you work it. I think I think a third probably is about right. Well, actually, you can do it from the market, can't you? Well, the first one was worth 40 marks, and the second one is worth 20. So between them, they're worth 40 marks. The two questions on this paper. The drug case, the heroin case, that's worth 20, and then the actually worth more than that. Actually, this has got a lot of. Yeah. 20. So it's 20 marks for the guy with the drug cartel case, confiscating assets. 15 marks for the Iranian furniture seller, and then 20 marks for the bank. That's quite a high proportion, actually. Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot. But other papers, some papers I've seen have only got that's just that one question about how would you tell the world what we do for AML. That's the only question, so it just varies. You know, it's hard to predict really. So I would say, in terms of preparation, yeah, make sure you understand the framework and talk about. You have to do an essay about, you know, how we fit in the AML stuff. So look at the introductory section, build up of that. Then make sure you understand the test for confiscation, how restraint works, and then the MLA process and investigatory orders. So it's, I mean, if you just have an idea, I've tried to set out in the notes in that sort of order, so you can sort of see it. Provisional measures, restraint and stuff, asset recovery. But like I say, don't get too, my advice, but don't get too hung up on the actual question. See what the question's about and write about that. So if it's about confiscation, write about the confiscation process. Don't get too hung up on the exact wording. So that'd be my advice.
Is there wanting to see whether we have an understanding of if we were in that situation, we'd go through the correct procedure?
Yeah, yeah.
Not necessarily the fact.
Yeah, what would you decide in that case? Doesn't really matter. I mean, it's if you miss obvious red flags, you know, the guy's an Iranian furniture seller for 3 million quid. What does that tell you? There could be a sanctions issue there. It could be money laundering. So you know that. But whether you say I would decide to X, Y, Z doesn't really point you. It's more I would advise them to think about these things, think about reported suspicion, blah blah, tipping off, be aware of it. But there's no right or wrong answer to what the correct process should be in that situation. I would say just show that you know how it all has to go, how it all works. Okay, any questions? No, well, good luck, guys.
Thanks very much.
And like I say, if you've got any questions, just email me. That's fine.
And I'll forward on that email to everybody.
Oh yeah, thank you. Those, yes, I've got that note.